Chapter 2026. But that was to be expected. Who didn't change after experiencing that incident? My Jojo. Yang Shirong hugged her little martial niece, and was just short of bawling her eyes out. At this moment, all the worries, uneasiness, and discomfort in her heart transformed into tenderness and faint joy. She stroked her little head and said softly, Aunt Master has no more regrets in this life to be able to see you again. Even if I go to the Yellow Springs right now, I'll still have the face to see Master and Senior Sister. Second Aunt Master. What nonsense are you saying? Arbor grabbed her hair and said in displeasure. All of you will be safe and sound in the future. Nothing will happen to you. Yang Shirong smiled and nodded. Okay. Everyone moved upstairs. Even though they were about to fill up a large room, they still couldn't fit 200 people inside. Arbor's eyes flickered, and he looked up at Qi Xian and the others, who were squeezed outside. He coughed lightly and said, How about we change locations to talk? Yang Shirong was startled. Change where? This room couldn't fit 200 holy water sect disciples. Arbor looked up and shouted at Mo Lian, who was outside the door. Hubby, can you set up a defensive boundary on this third floor? The kind that won't allow any idle people to enter. Okay. Mo Lian immediately knew what Jojo wanted to do, so she naturally agreed. She raised her hand and glanced at Ma Shurchen and little Tai Sui. Help reinforce it. Ma Shurchen also understood. Little Tai Sui was startled. Although it didn't understand, its hands moved. The three people worked together to lay down 3 defensive boundaries. In reality, no one in this inn could break through the defensive boundaries that Mo Lian laid down. However, this matter was of great importance, so for safety's sake, Prince Mo still held back. He had Ma Shurchen and little Tai Sui reinforce his defensive boundaries twice. In this way, even mosquitoes and flies couldn't fly in. If someone wanted to forcefully break through, it could be said that they were courting death. On the other side, Second Martial Aunt Yang Shirong felt as if a huge rock had fallen from the sky and pressed down on her head. Her pretty face was as black as the bottom of a pot, and her entire person was petrified. Husband? What kind of title was that? That was too much. This brat actually tricked her Jojo into calling him husband after not seeing him for a few years? Yang Shirong's face stiffened. To be more precise, all of the Holy Water Sect disciples' faces turned stiff, except for Yu Gui's group. Mo Kingdom's Crown Prince, you've gone too far. Yang Shirong harumphed coldly. Don't think that you can trick my Jojo just because she's young. In the past, our Jojo didn't have any sisters by his side to help him. That's why he was so easily deceived by you. But now, with her martial uncle here, don't even think about tricking her into using those nonsensical nicknames. Ma Shurchen stifled her laughter, looking like she was waiting to watch a good show. Prince Mo expressionlessly walked up from the parted crowd and respectfully bowed to Yang Shirong. Second Martial Aunt, Jojo and I are already married. What? Everyone was in an uproar. Pairs of eyes blazed as they stared at the man before them. Yes, this fellow was indeed quite good-looking and had a magnificent appearance. However, this did not mean that he could casually abduct her family's Qiao Qiao. Yang Shirong hastily shielded the little fellow and retreated a step. Jojo, good-looking men are most likely liars. Chapter 2027. You'll never go wrong if you listen to your martial uncle. We're not like those poor girls who have to get married early because of family circumstances. Yang Shirong harumphed. We can't get married so early. Mo Kingdom's Crown Prince. Don't think that just because our family's Jojo doesn't have any elders by her side, you can just go through the wedding ceremony and settle the marriage so easily. Arbor blinked and tugged on her second martial uncle's sleeve. Prince Mo pursed his lips and said with a serious expression, Second Martial Uncle, Jojo and I got married in a grand ceremony with the blessings of our parents. Jojo's name is already in our Mo family's genealogy. In other words, can you stop adding to the mess? What? Yang Shirong was even more furious and shook her head. I don't believe you. How could Jojo's parents be so foolish? Jojo's still so young. Why would they be in such a hurry to marry her off? You must have done something. Yang Shirong's ability to hit the nail on the head. Prince Mo's handsome face darkened. Jojo, Tell your martial uncle. How did you get married to him? My husband said. Lien floated to Jojo's side in a flash and pulled her little body from Yang Shirong's embrace. Jojo, there's no need to tell second martial uncle everything that's said between us husband and wife. What kind of joke was this? If Yang Shirong knew that he had coaxed the little fellow into agreeing to his royal father's betrothal, second martial uncle would explode like a firecracker. Jojo was such an honest child that she would say whatever she wanted to say. If second martial uncle asked, she would definitely spill everything. Xiaomu blinked and obediently nodded her head. Yang Shirong watched from the side and was so angry that smoke was rising from her head. Mo Kingdom's crown prince. Second martial uncle. You can just call me Little Mo your balls. Yang Shirong angrily pulled Arbor to her side and said earnestly, Jojo, you're still young. Don't be fooled by others. Tell me honestly, was this marriage arranged by the old great king of the Mo Kingdom? Arbor's eyes lit up, and he was about to nod. Mo Lien hurriedly pulled her to her side and reminded her. Jojo, you said that you wanted to talk somewhere else. Look, it's so crowded here. One room can't even fit so many people. Indeed, quite a few senior sisters were standing on the bed. Xian, on one. Over here outside. Qi Xuanxuan's voice came through the crowd. Arbor's eyes flickered. He coughed and said, I'll take you to a place. Ah, where is it? For a moment, no one knew where she was going, so they all looked at her curiously. Arbor exchanged a few words with the water baby. A wisp of nimble mist emerged from her body and instantly engulfed everyone's bodies. In an instant, everyone felt as if the scenery in front of them had changed, and an earth-shattering change appeared in front of them. If it weren't for the fact that they were stepping on soft green grass and smelling the fragrance of plants, they would have thought that they were still dreaming. Holy shit, is this the land of inheritance, the heavenly abode? Wow, there are so many big peaches. Qi Xuanxuan's ghostly voice came from afar, calling back the souls of Yang Shirong and the others who were still in a daze. Everyone trembled and stared at the scene in front of them in shock. Chapter 2028. The little fatty pinched Mata's cheeks several times. Does it hurt? Does it hurt you? Fuck. Let me pinch and see if it hurts. Mata recovered from his shock and pinched back with his hand. Duanmu, I'm not freaking dreaming, right? Zhou Danjin secretly pinched his thigh before widening his eyes. This student was going to ascend to heaven. Everyone finally came back to their senses with great difficulty, and once again sank into the terrifying news of Miss Qiao holding a mystic realm. Wow, there's so much good food here. Everyone. This freaking spoilsport child. Everyone was originally still reveling in the scenery, but after Qi Xuanxuan's hollering, all the mood was gone. Yang Shirong turned to look at Arbor in a daze. My Jojo, is what you see real? It's real. Arbor nodded and pulled Yang Shirong's hand up to a peach tree in front of them. Second Ant Master, can you feel its life aura? I can feel it. Yang Shirong was both excited and rueful, but she was even more filled with joy. She hugged the child and patted her back hard. You child. Ant Master was worried about you all the time. I didn't expect. With this mystic realm in hand, what did Jojo have to fear? Even if they encountered a powerful enemy, they would at least have a place to hide. Her Xiao Qiao had such a great opportunity, so it was no wonder her cultivation soared so rapidly. Why did she have to go to Brinseat Island to find the ghost spirit realm? Her little Jojo's grotto heaven immortal abode was a pure, natural spirit realm. Second Ant Master, let me bring you all to a place, okay? Okay. Yang Shirong nodded repeatedly, tears of joy welling up in her eyes. Her Jojo was blessed with great fortune, and was a child with great fortune. If Master learned of this in the netherworld, she would definitely laugh heartily. Follow me. Arbor pulled Yang Shirong's hand, and with a thought, he brought all the senior sisters of the Holy Water sect to the peach blossom-filled peach blossom slope. Facing the peach blossom forest, the peach blossom slope was surrounded by a circle of green water that gurgled and flowed. The slope was covered with flowers and green grass, giving off a pleasant fragrance. A lonely grave, a coffin sealed in ice. When the disciples saw this, they couldn't help but burst into tears. Suppressing their sobs, they rushed forward and knelt in front of the grave. Wu Shurchen glanced at the crown prince in confusion. She saw him standing far away under a peach tree, his eyes filled with reluctance as he looked at Xiao Qiao's frail back. At this moment, Emolian was extremely worried. He recalled that more than 3 years ago, this little fellow had picked up the bones of her martial uncles and senior sisters, one by one. He wondered how much time she had spent to create this lonely grave with her own hands. It was as if a small figure had appeared in front of his eyes, piling dirt in front of the grave, staring blankly, silently weeping, kowtowing, and crying bitterly. His heart ached unbearably. Bang! The sound of a wine jar shattering caused Emolian to recover from her chaotic emotions. When she looked up, she saw Yang Shirong holding a large bowl of wine and raising her cup in unison with the 200 holy water sect disciples. The belated memorial ceremony was currently being carried out in a solemn and silent atmosphere. Everyone tilted their heads back and downed their cups in one gulp. Then they heard Arbor say softly, "Let's get drunk today and set sail tomorrow. We won't let down the sect and severely damage the future. We will definitely comfort your souls in heaven with a myriad of glory. I'm here, the sect is here." Chapter 2029. At this moment, Qi Xianxian and the rest were infected by this strong camaraderie. They stared deeply at this scene and were unable to speak for a long time. On the slope of Paradise Garden, the Holy Water Sect disciples reunited after a long time and got drunk. It was as if they had returned to the night of the fireworks. The next day, after Arbor woke up, he treated everyone to a sumptuous breakfast at Paradise Garden. Then, he changed his mind and led everyone to Fish Orchid Planet. "Wow, Jojo, so you really threw the Crimson Firmament Ocean boat into the sea?" Qi Xuanxuan's mouth was slightly agape as she exclaimed in amazement. She faced the sea and fixed her eyes on the Crimson Firmament Ocean boat docked by the shore. Right now, she really felt that her Jojo wasn't human anymore. That which normal persons Dantian could form a star domain of its own? According to Jojo, this sea area wasn't even the largest star in her star domain. She simply didn't dare to imagine how grand it would be if she could release all the stars in her star domain one day. "You're saying that cultivating here for a day is only 2 hours in the outside world?" Instructor Weiwei suddenly raised his voice and asked. Meanwhile, Zhou Danjin stared at Arbor resentfully and said, "No wonder those students from the other academies had to look down on you during the competition. Look at you, child. You have such a good resource, but you don't know how to use it. If you use it well, you'll grow by leaps and bounds. You actually follow Duan Muqi, Xianxian, and the rest around all day and don't think about improving yourself. Don't cultivate properly." Chirp 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 chirp. Arbor cast a glance at Instructor Zhou. Duan Muqing, who was innocently implicated, was expressionless. Qi Xianxian was puzzled. What did she do? Why did the instructor have to bring her along every time he lectured Jojo? Tell me, how did you waste such a good time like this? How good would it have been if we had slept on the beach last night? Zhou Danjin continued to nag. It should be daybreak outside now, right? If we had slept here last night, we could have saved more time to absorb spirit energy, right? You want to improve your cultivation, right? Arbor pointed the back of his head at Instructor Zhou. Teacher, don't be so agitated, don't be so agitated. Fatty quickly stepped forward and said, It's not too late now. I'll go out later to see what time it is. If we have enough time, let's stay here and cultivate for a while. This is the attitude of learning. Zhou Danjin had an expression that said, Little Fatty, you're worth teaching. He nodded and said to the others, You can practice here for at least half a day. In other words, it was only an hour in the outside world. Everyone must seize this opportunity. The nagging instructor Zhou realized that after he finished speaking, the students had all moved to the red Nimbus blue wave ship. Let's go out to sea. Qi Xianxian laughed heartily and waved at the teachers who were standing on the beach with speechless expressions. Teachers, all of you should cultivate well. When we're done, we'll come back to pick you guys up. Bastards. Sigh, without Instructor Zhou's nagging beside my ear, I'm really not used to it. Fatty spread out his hands, expressing his helplessness. Everyone stared at Fatty, as if they were looking at an idiot. Qi Xianxian cheered and ran to the deck. I'll go and enjoy the sea breeze. Chapter 2030. Duan Muqing, and the rest couldn't help but helplessly watch her dash out. Then let's also go get some fresh air. A saint artifact was indeed a saint artifact. Not to mention 200 people. Even if there were 20,000 or 20,000, it would still be able to hold them all. After all, this was an item that could be big or small. Arbor still didn't know how many people this ship could hold. He had never tried it before. Right that everyone sat down leisurely at the bow of the ship and chatted idly. Although they said they were chatting, most of the time, it was the others who were blindly chatting while Miss Chiao listened expressionlessly. If you asked her something, she would only answer if she was willing to. If she wasn't, she would pretend that this darling doesn't understand, and say, oh or ah, and immediately kill the conversation. Everyone was also accustomed to this. They felt an indescribable sense of contentment in their hearts as they swam on the boundless ocean on this warm day. Jojo, young Shirong said to her with a grin, how about letting your senior sisters cultivate on Fish Orchid Planet for a while? A portion of the Holy Water Sect disciples hadn't broken through to the spiritual realm, even after coming to Poland Manor, for 3 years, due to their innate aptitudes. This made young Shirong quite anxious. After all, the Holy Water Sect's disciples' cultivation greatly affected the Holy Water Sect's future development. When Arbor heard this, he nodded and said, Aunt Master, I also wanted to talk to you about this. How about you go out after finding a treasured land with good feng shui to establish a sect? Until then, you should cultivate well in this spirit realm. That's great. Young Shirong nodded with gratification. 2 hours on Fish Orchid Planet was equivalent to a day in the outside world. Such a natural cultivation environment would definitely allow the Holy Water Sect disciples to benefit greatly and improve their cultivation. Most importantly, her Qiao Qiao had even considered the location of the sect. She was truly a considerate and good child. Young Shirong patted Arbor's small head. When she saw the crown prince walking over from the corner of her eye, she immediately put on a disdainful expression and glared at him covetously. Stinking brat, what are you doing here? Pitiful Lien. The little fellow glanced at him sympathetically. That look in his eyes seemed to indicate that he wanted to watch a good show, but was unable to help. Emo Lien was amused and angry at the same time. She really wanted to grab her and give her a good beating. Let's see if she could still watch her husband's antics. However, with young Shirong and the group of Holy Water Sect girls eyeing him covetously, Prince Emo expressed that if he wanted to have a good life, he still had to build a good relationship with Jojo's maiden family. Martial aunt. Arbor gently tugged on young Shirong's sleeve. My husband is very good to me. Young Shirong snorted and curled her lips. If he doesn't treat you well, I'll break his legs. Uff. The venerable Peach Blossom Immortal wanted to laugh, but Prince Emo glared at him. Jojo. Emo Lien blinked at her, feeling wronged. The little fellow reflexively wanted to go to his side. Young Shirong reached out to stop her and pulled Arbor towards the railing. Jojo, accompany Martial Aunt to fish. How about we eat a fish feast at noon? Arbor expressed that it didn't matter what they ate. She only turned around to look at the black-faced prince, Emo sympathetically, and waved her small paw at him. Hubby, work hard. Infiltrate our Holy Water Sect like how you infiltrated my family. Emo Lien didn't know whether to laugh or cry as she looked at her, a smile on her lips. His Jojo was in such a good mood today. Chapter 2031. If his Jojo was in such a good mood every day, then he would be at ease. The venerable Peach Blossom Immortal turned to look at Emo Lien. Cough, what's going on with the Holy Water Sect? The Crown Prince glanced at him. Would I tell you about Jojo? Stop fucking dreaming. The venerable Peach Blossom Immortal was a bit angry and glanced at him. Petty. He was petty. Would he go around telling others about his wife's matters? She even said it to the person who might become her invisible love rival? Haha. You can know if you want to. You have to tell me what exactly were the 3 trials of money, power, and lust that you passed in the illusory matrix of the punishment realm. Emo Lien glanced at He Shurchen. In your dreams. Of course. Shurchen wouldn't tell this fellow what he encountered in the illusory matrix. If he said it, he said it. Shurchen harumphed and turned to leave in a huff. Standing behind him, Crown Prince Mo gazed indifferently at that person, his lips curling up slightly. Shurchen. Could it be that he experienced the same illusory dream as him? Arbor's group sailed on the sea for a while, and only went out together when they felt that it was about time. Yang Shirong and the rest naturally had to go out as well. After all, many of the guests saw their group of 200 travel-worn people last night, and finding Jojo at the inn. If they didn't come down from upstairs early in the morning and directly disappeared, then it would be too strange in everyone's eyes. Thump, 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 thump. With a series of footsteps on the stairs, the people in the lobby winked and looked towards the stairs. Their eyes nearly popped out of their sockets when they saw it. Fuck, where did so many beautiful, refined, and alluring girls come from? Their auras were all so fresh and refined. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that they were celestial fairies that descended to the mortal world. Yang Shirong coldly swept her gaze across the lobby and the men who were staring at the holy water sex girls until they were transfixed. Qi Xianxian ran down the stairs and shouted, "Shopkeeper, give me 2 pots of hot porridge." "Okay. Miss, there are so many of you. Are 2 pots of porridge enough for everyone?" It's enough. Just come up." Qi Xianxian waved her hand and called out. What a joke. They were just pretending to ask for 2 pots of porridge. Just now, they had already eaten a delicious breakfast on Paradise Planet. They were not hungry at all. "Waiter, do you have a vacant room?" An arrogant female voice came from outside the inn. The leader of the group of people who followed them in was tall and slender. She wore a pink robe that exposed half of her shoulders. She was only wearing a thin pink gauze robe. This woman's body looked very graceful and voluptuous. As soon as she walked in, the gazes of the many men in the hall shifted unblinkingly to her body, and they swallowed their saliva with all their might. The woman didn't feel offended. Instead, she was very happy to attract the attention of all the men present. She chuckled and gently scattered the handkerchief in her hand. Like a happy butterfly, the thin and soft silk handkerchief brushed past the noses of the men. The few of them revealed a bewildered expression as they took a deep breath and exhaled. What are they doing? The little stoic's cold question instantly caused everyone present to twitch their mouths. It's here again. The Holy Water Sect disciples who were familiar with their little junior sister's style all suffered internal injuries from stifling their laughter. This child was born to be a killjoy. Chapter 2032. The woman angrily glared at her, but with this glance she instantly completely ignored the little stoic's icy face. There were only a few stunningly beautiful men in her line of sight, that the little stoic suddenly stretched out 2 fingers. Yang Shirong, who was standing next to her, clearly twitched her mouth. As expected, she saw her little niece use 2 fingers to indicate the distance of her line of sight. Then she asked in puzzlement, "Why isn't she looking at me?" Pfft. Qi Xianxian really couldn't hold it in and laughed out loud. Why the heck did she feel that Jojo's words and actions were so frightening? Arbor was baffled. She was clearly the one who asked the question. This woman clearly wanted to glare at her, but when she looked away, her gaze would wander off to who knew where. The little fellow lifted her head, and her gaze suddenly turned angry. She subconsciously shifted to stand in front of Emolien. "Who allowed you to look at my husband? I'll dig your eyeballs out if you keep looking. Everyone. Jojo, this female pervert is also looking at me." Ma Shurchen aggrievedly tugged at her sleeve, which earned her a disdainful glare from Prince Mo. This punk was pretending to be young in front of his wife again. Arbor took another step to the side and blocked in front of Ma Shurchen. He glared at the woman and said, "What are you looking at? Everyone. Actually, you can't block them, okay? Your height can't even cover 2 men's faces." Yang Shirong's eyebrows twitched inexplicably. "Jojo. Aunt Master." Arbor turned to look at her and said in displeasure, "We're not eating porridge anymore. Let's go." She didn't like letting other people see her lotus. In any case, everyone was full from eating, so they honestly couldn't rouse any interest in that plain porridge. Upon hearing her words, everyone immediately went along with it and nodded repeatedly. "Let's go." We have to hurry over. Maybe people from the other academies have already arrived at this time. The little fatty said with a smile. MHM. Let's go. Today is the last competition, so we must strive to get third place. Why is your goal so low? Lu Yu is right. Don't bite off more than you can chew. If we can get third place in today's project, I feel that we still have a chance to go to Brinset Island. Stop! The woman, who was completely ignored by everyone, suddenly screamed at the back view of everyone leaving. She took a big step forward and blocked the door. I'm so angry. Were these people blind? None of them seemed to be able to see her existence. He actually wanted to bypass her and go out? Ah, you, aren't you that noble and virtuous young sir? A voice interrupted the woman's shriek. A person popped out from behind that woman and quickly walked up to Xiao Mu. Suddenly, she reached out and tightly grasped Xiao Mu's hand. She shook it vigorously and said with bright eyes, Benefactor, I'm truly too happy to be able to meet you here. How about I be the host today? Arbor looked at the woman in front of him blankly. He completely couldn't remember when he met this person. Qi Xianxian couldn't help but twitch her mouth. She walked to Arbor's side and said, we met at the Lava Mountains, Fairy Yellow Crane. Yes. Fairy Yellow Crane said excitedly. You can call me Little Yellow Crane. Little Yellow Crane. Everyone silently looked at each other. And for a moment, they felt somewhat speechless. Sleep. Tomorrow at 10 o'clock. Chapter 2033. Little Yellow Crane. Arbor silently glanced at Qi Xianxian and used his eyes to ask her. Who? She completely didn't remember anyone else. Qi Xianxian helplessly rubbed her forehead and coughed lightly. It's that day when our team was besieged by a herd of beasts while training in the Lava Mountain Range. Right. Benefactor of noble character and unquestionable integrity. Fairy Yellow Crane tightly grasped Arbor's hands and said gratefully, If Benefactor hadn't left with the herd of beasts that day, all of us would have suffered a calamity. Everyone, why the heck did they find it so strange? Although many people didn't know the truth, based on their understanding of little junior sister, Miss Qiao. This absolutely wasn't Qiao's style. Arbor was expressionless, and reflexively pulled her small hand away. Fairy Yellow Crane tightly grasped it and said rather agitatedly, Benefactor, don't decline anymore this time. Let me be the host and treat everyone to a meal to thank Benefactor properly. Everyone, thank you, we're already very full. Qi Xianxian hastily pulled back Miss Qiao's small hand and chuckled awkwardly at Fairy Yellow Crane. No need to be so courteous, Fairy. You're Benefactor's friend, right? Just call me Little Yellow Crane. We don't need to be so formal. Little Yellow Crane. Qi Xianxian coughed helplessly. Little Yellow Crane. We still have to rush to Shenghua Martial Arts Arena for the competition. How about? Benefactor is going to Shenghua Martial Arts Arena for the competition? Then I must go and take a look. Fairy Yellow Crane clenched her fists and immediately said, Benefactor's skills are exceptional. She'll definitely win the competition and take first place. Where did you get such confidence in JoJo? The mentors glanced at her speechlessly. Yellow Crane. Fairy Lingfei and Pink couldn't bear it anymore and shouted angrily. Why are you chirping with them? Could this dunce differentiate between friend and foe? Didn't she see that she wanted to diss that little stoic? What was the meaning of this crazy woman suddenly interfering? Huang He, senior sister Lingfei, why are you yelling at me like that? Fairy Yellow Crane turned her head and looked blankly at the red-faced Fairy Lingfei who was glaring at her. Fairy Lingfei was so angry that she almost couldn't vent her anger. How could this brainless Huang He be her junior sister? Get over here! Lingfei roared. Fairy Huang He hastily leaned towards the little stoic and shook her head, saying, I'm not going over. Senior sister Lingfei, you stay in the inn first. I plan to go to the Shenghua Martial Arts Arena with my benefactor to watch his match and cheer him on. Go shit yourself. Fairy Lingfei's pretty face flushed red with anger. She ground her teeth and said angrily, Huang He, don't tell me you've forgotten what Master said when we came out. Fairy Yellow Crane looked at her with a troubled expression. Master told me to listen to you. But this is my private matter. Why you can't interfere? The reason why little yellow crane's voice turned softer was because it realized that its senior sister's gaze was as though she wanted to devour someone. Get your ass over here right now. Arbor raised his hand, and a strong gust of wind swept past Fairy Lingfei's temples in an instant. Greatly alarmed, Fairy Lingfei did a backflip and landed on a square dining table in the main hall with a whoosh. Bang! The dining table under his feet suddenly exploded. Chapter 2034. Fairy Lingfei shifted once more. Just as she was about to land on the ground, she felt a gust of mist suddenly engulfing her in it. Bam! Fairy Lingfei discovered in astonishment that she had been sent flying by this mist. She tumbled down the stairs in a very sorry state, and her waist almost hung from the handrail. This was an extraordinary humiliation. Fairy Lingfei's eyes burned with a fiery red of fury. Too furious. She didn't expect that this stoic face would directly send her flying without even saying a word before making a move. Fairy Huanghe's mouth also gaped slightly, and she almost clapped and cheered. But when she saw her senior sister's humiliated expression, she hastily shut her mouth in embarrassment, not daring to speak. As expected, her benefactor was skilled. Fairy Huanghe secretly praised in her heart. You! Long-winded! Arbor coldly swept a glance at the ashen-faced Fairy Lingfei before turning to walk out of the inn. Long-winded! Long-winded! Everyone chimed in at once, throwing the ashen-faced Fairy Lingfei the same sentence before following the little stoic out. When Fairy Huanghe saw this, how would she dare to rub her senior sister the wrong way? She hastily followed after them like a wisp of smoke. Fairy Lingfei was so angry that her silver teeth were about to break from gritting them. She shouted furiously behind Huanghe. Huanghe, come back here. Huanghe, you deserve to die. Don't come back once you step out of this door. Fairy Huanghe shuddered. Qi Xianxian glanced at her from the corner of her eyes. Is there something wrong with your senior sister? Is there something wrong with her brain? Fairy Huanghe hastily shook her head and said, although my senior sister Lingfei's temper is a bit irritable, she wasn't like this before. Don't take offense, I'll properly persuade her later. TSK. The little fatty couldn't help but scoff. She already chased you out of the door. She said earlier that she wouldn't let you go back if you stepped out of this inn. Are you an idiot? It shouldn't be like this, right? Fairy Huanghe forced a bitter expression and shook her head. My senior sister is merely in a fit of anger right now. After a while, I think it should be like this, cough, alright. Haha. Everyone couldn't help but throw her 2 words. Just look at Fairy Lingfei's murderous look just now. Would she be fine after being angry? Fairy Yellow Crane's disobedience would only make her even angrier, causing her to fall into a violent rage. But it didn't matter. Everyone only saw a mad dog barking at them. In the blink of an eye, they forgot about Fairy Lingfei. Everyone familiarly entered the Xinghua martial arts arena. This time, it was as if they had arrived on time. As soon as they entered, the mighty group of people attracted the attention of the crowd. Fuck, where did this top academy get so many pretty girls to be their backup? This is too exaggerated. This lineup. Could it be that the top academies have already won? Instructor Zhou and the others happily came to the seating area. As soon as they sat down, they heard a lot of discussion. Naturally, everyone turned a blind eye to it. Their gazes swept around indifferently and landed on the students on the stage. As soon as Arbor and the others entered the stage, they attracted a lot of attention. Li Nanshan was the leader, standing on the stage. Seeing her walk over, she nodded at her in a friendly manner. Arbor returned the greeting. The CEO Judge Hong Qi walked up to the crowd of people who were paying attention to him and said with a smile, "Are you ready?" Chapter 2035. Since everyone is ready then. Hong Qi suddenly smiled mysteriously at the crowd before he could finish his sentence. Elder Hong stretched out his hand and turned a ring on his finger. In an instant, everyone saw a light screen seeping out from the ring. Soon, a sealed light red transparent shield appeared in front of old Hong. A simulated environment? Everyone was shocked, but they understood what was going on. Since it was said that they were going to catch birds, it probably wouldn't be that simple. Those who are ready can go in. Elder Hong gestured for everyone to go in. A disciple from the Guang Academy swallowed his saliva and walked in front of the light barrier hesitantly. Elder Hong smiled and said, "Everyone, please be careful. Although you know that everything in the testing environment is fake, I have to tell you something. But I have to tell you one thing. If you die or get injured in the test environment, you will suffer the same fate in real life." Everyone shuddered and shut their mouths tightly, waiting solemnly. The Guang Academy student raised his small hand weakly and asked, "Didn't we say that we were going to release all kinds of birds in the sky above the arena? Why do we have to go into the testing environment now?" The student's voice slowly weakened as he realized that his instructor was glaring at him. The meaning was obvious. Hurry up and go. Stop being so arrogant. Go in and take advantage of the terrain. The Guang Academy student was hot-headed and stepped into the transparent barrier. Instantly, he felt that the scenery in front of him changed drastically. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. A bunch of bloodbats flew over, causing the woman to shriek in fright. Wasn't this asking them to catch birds? Why did a bunch of bloodbats appear? Were these bloodbats birds? No. The student was puzzled and hurriedly waved his hand to cut down a bat that was flying towards his face. Arbor, Qi Xianxian, and the others also entered the testing environment one after another. As soon as they entered, they realized that they were in a cave, and their feet were submerged in ice-cold water. The worst thing was that a large group of bats came out of the cave and pounced on them. Everyone drew their swords and sabers and slashed at the bats that flew in front of them. In this short period of time, Ri Guang, Yusei, Xinghui, Chen Guang, and the rest of the students from the Heavenly Bestowing Academy had also entered the testing environment. They could feel the malicious intent of this environment towards them. Bai Xia followed behind the captain of the Starlight Academy. With a look of disgust, she pulled out her left foot from the muddy water and whined, "What the hell is this place? Everyone be careful." The captain of Starlight Academy reminded them with a stern expression, "Don't let these bloodbats get close to you." "Fuck. Are these bats done yet?" Mata flicked his spear and pierced a bloodbat that was pouncing over, turning it into minced meat. Duan Muqing stood beside Arbor with his sword in hand. All the bloodbats that pounced on them were dealt with by his sword aura from a few meters away. Miss Chiao stood in the middle of the crowd and looked around curiously. This was her second time experiencing this kind of testing environment. She didn't know how this kind of simulated environment was formed. It was said that only divine weapon masters could create spatial artifacts that could simulate environments like this. In that case, her Lien should be able to do it. Chapter 2036. While everyone was fighting fiercely, the little fellow's mind was wandering. She was thinking of asking Prince Mo to get her a ring that could release a simulated environment to play with. In the future, she would also send them into simulated environments to train whenever she felt like it. Bang! A bloodbat that flew in front of Duan Muqing was sent flying with a sweep of his hand. It turned into fine powder in midair. Jojo, focus. Duan Muqing helplessly tugged at her sleeve. Only then did she regain her senses. Jojo, this blood. Tui, it's coming again. With a flying kick, Qi Xianxian kicked a bloodbat to the ground. She raised her sword and cleanly chopped off the bat's head. Jojo, do you think these bloodbats are the birds we're supposed to catch? I don't think so. Xiaomu blinked. In her impression, weren't birds all colorful, small, exquisite, and very adorable? These bloodbats were probably obstacles in the testing environment. Everyone attacked together. Don't just stand there empty-handed. Captain Dan from Yuchuan Prefecture's Frostgale Academy couldn't help but shout at a few people who hadn't made a move yet. Among them was a certain Miss Chiao, who was leisurely watching the show. A certain Miss Chiao glanced at Captain Dan from Frostgale Academy, then turned her head away. The other people from the other academies, on the other hand, moved after hearing Captain Dan's shout. The group of people engaged in a life-and-death battle with the bloodbats that continuously surged out from the depths of the cave. Arbor followed beside Duan Muqing, Lu Yu, and a few other team members. Occasionally, she would move her fingers and throw out 2 or 3 thin needles. Occasionally, she would raise her arm and release a black gold arrow. Most of the time, she was observing from the sidelines. If everyone was using their spiritual power to fight the blood bats like dogs, this little girl probably didn't even use 1/10 of their spiritual power. Many blood bats piled up beside everyone's feet. Together with the ice-cold water, they formed a meandering river of blood. When everyone stepped on the blood bats, they felt as if they were mixed with the mud in the depths of the cave. It was very uncomfortable. Uncomfortable. Miss Chiao lifted her small feet and frowned as she looked at the mud on her shoes. Then, she rubbed her feet against the stone wall at the side. His body, which had originally wanted to leap up, was inexplicably pulled by gravity and could not rise into the air. Oh, this testing environment is also a gravity zone. As Xiao Mu pondered this expressionlessly, she followed Duan Muqing and the others into the depths of the cave, stumbling her way up and down. He hated this kind of dark and gloomy place the most. Arbor reached out and took out 2 luminous pearls from his inner world, one in his left hand and the other in his right. He asked impatiently, "When can we leave this place?" The group of people who were fighting the blood bats turned around to look at her. They were almost amused by her. It was bad enough that this little brat didn't kill the bats, but he even rubbed the mud on his shoes with a look of disgust. He lowered his head and skipped away while picking up the stones on his toes. "What are you doing? Why aren't they killing the bats?" A female disciple from the Celestial Light Academy couldn't help but feel anxious. They were all girls. How could this girl act like she was playing with the crowd and go with the flow? If she was happy, she would kill a few bats. If she was unhappy, she would not attack at all. On the other hand, she was fighting like a dog against a dozen blood bats that pounced on her. She couldn't help but cry out because of the huge difference in their mentality. Arbor looked up at the horde of blood bats. "Do I get points for killing them? Of course not." Chapter 2037. What kind of situation was this? She was still thinking about points. Was this girl an idiot? The female disciple from the Chunguang Academy looked at Arbor with deep disdain. Xiao Mu naturally glared back in irritation, and she leisurely shook her head at the female disciple. "Are you dumb? Since there are no points, what's the point of fighting?" "You." Everyone was amused by her words. "Fine, if you don't fight, can you pass through the bat swarm without fighting?" It was obvious that this path led to the end. If you want to go in and see the depths of the cave, you have to get rid of these blood bats. Arbor stuck a speed talisman, a Vajra talisman, and an invisibility talisman on each of his team members. The 8 people from the top academies instantly disappeared in front of everyone. After a moment, everyone could only see the few people from the top academies stomping on the ground. They passed through. They passed through so easily, everyone couldn't help but be stunned. They wrung their hands and stared at Arbor's team, who had obviously entered the depths of the cave and were walking toward it. "Damn it!" Someone cursed in a low voice. Li Nanshan was the first to move. She killed a bloody path through the bat swarm and led the group from Jiqing Academy into the depths of the cave. "Wait a moment." Arbor's cold voice rang out. Li Nanshan from Jiqing Academy and her team paused in their steps. However, a portion of the Chunguang Academy group didn't stop and continued to run forward a few meters. Suddenly, one of the male students from the Celestial Light Academy felt a slight pain on his cheek. "Pa!" He raised his hand and slapped his left cheek, killing a mosquito with a heavy slap. He cursed and was about to continue walking forward when he suddenly felt pain all over his body. Just like that, he inexplicably fell to the ground where the blood bats and sludge were mixed together. Ah! Everyone jumped in fright, thinking that he had been bitten by a blood bat. They hurriedly shouted, "Everyone be careful! Do blood bats bite people? Come and take a look. What's wrong with this student?" The voice of the student who had fallen into the blood and mud had already quieted down by now. Everyone only saw a strange flame shoot out of his body and burn to its heart's content. In less than a quarter of an hour, the man was burned into a pile of ashes. Qi Xianxian gulped. "Oh my God! Was he dead? Did he die after leaving? This guy has already been burned to ashes. He's definitely dead." Buzz, buzz, buzz. A series of subtle vibrations mixed in with the swarm of blood bats was heading towards them at an extremely strange speed. At this moment, The mentors who were watching the competition in the outside world were naturally in an uproar. Hong Chi-ting immediately stood up from his seat, his gaze fixed on a teacher from the heaven-bestowing academy, with an indifferent expression. Instructor He, didn't you say that there would be no problems in this enclosed testing environment? Just now, a student had died right in front of them. Activate your defensive barriers. Duamuqing shouted sternly. Everyone felt a slight jolt in their hearts, and involuntarily did as he said. In such a chaotic time, it was naturally a good thing to have such a pillar of support. Everyone's expression froze. Chapter 2038. This joke was a bit too much. Of course, in the past, a few of the students who fought for glory in the academy ranking competition might be sacrificed. However, the poisonous mosquitoes in the test environment were indiscriminate and large-scale terrorist attacks. If it was not handled well, it would wipe out all the outstanding students in the 6 prefectures academy. The Poland Manor instructor called Instructor He by Elder Hong smiled faintly. Don't be too nervous. This is also a way to filter out the strength of the students. Only after experiencing true life and death will the students grow, right? Grow your ass. Everyone couldn't help but curse in their hearts. Even the instructors from the other academies were casting disapproving glances at Instructor He. This is a bit too much, Instructor He. Sunlight Academy's instructor Chao Dan glared at Instructor He unhappily and frowned quickly. Elder Hong, this concerns the safety of all the students. I hope you can open up the sealed testing environment and let everyone out. Hong Chi nodded. He had the same intention. Poland Manor's instructor He smiled faintly and shook his head. Back then, you all agreed to enter the testing environment for the last test. Now you're suddenly turning against me and blaming me? No one is blaming you. Instructor He, it's just that the competition in the testing environment is a bit too dangerous. Those poisonous mosquitoes are. As he spoke, Instructor Chao Dan's expression changed slightly. He clearly saw that within the transparent cover, one of his students was stared at by a mosquito and fell heavily to the ground. It's over. Everyone's hearts tightened. He Shurchin looked at Prince Emo who was sitting beside him. Could this be the legendary fiery demon poisonous mosquitoes? This was a bit exaggerated. How could a mere academy ranking competition involve the fiery demon poisonous mosquitoes that Underworld Regions Li family specialized in? These things were rare. Only Underworld Regions Li family specialized in rearing these little poisonous creatures. These fiery demon poisonous mosquitoes could be considered Underworld Regions Li family's signature poisonous creature. Why would they appear in a ranking competition testing environment? Everyone saw Miss Chiao's figure suddenly appear, and a pill was shot into the mouth of the student on the ground. This fire poison was able to escape from the heart and lungs and start a fire from the inside of the body. It started to burn from the 5 viscera and 6 bowels all the way to the outside of the body. Such a miraculous thing was rare. If it were an ordinary person, they would naturally be stumped by this evil fire. But was Miss Chiao an ordinary person? Her medical skills had already reached the peak of perfection. A mere bit of demonic fire was naturally unable to do anything to her. But this Motzi looked rather exquisite. With great interest, Miss Chiao summoned a pharaoh from her conscious and slapped one of the mosquitoes to death. Everyone was scared out of their wits. They hurriedly activated their defensive barriers, planning to swarm forward and kill all the fiery evil mosquitoes. However, with a wave of Chiao Mu's hand, the black mist-like bundle of demonic fiery mosquitoes were all sucked into Paradise Planet's 100 Poisons Valley with a single thought. Sigh. Not bad. A group of little fellows can be of some use at a critical moment. Let them become good friends with her poison-tailed butterflies. The pitiful group of poisonous mosquitoes was currently being attacked by a large group of poison-tailed butterflies, ravaging them like a storm. Very quickly, the poison-tailed butterfly queen's little supreme status was established. Chapter 2039. Needless to say, this action made everyone, both inside and outside the shield, dumbfounded. The students from the Sunlight Academy cupped their fists at Arbor excitedly. Thank you for saving us again. Miss Chiao must have kept all the poison-tailed butterflies in the storage talisman. Yes, yes, yes. We can just destroy the storage talisman and get rid of these poisonous creatures once and for all. Ha ha ha. Miss Chow is brilliant. Miss Chow is mighty. The students from the Sunlight Academy made their own guesses and deductions before coming to the same conclusion. Afterwards, he actually started cheering for Qiao Mu obsequiously. Miss Qiao, keep them. Keep all the blood bats in the storage talisman. Thank you so much. Qiao Mu swept a glance at those hideous vampire bats before turning her small head away in disdain. Whoever liked them could keep them. She didn't want them. They were so ugly and had average attack power. They weren't as cute as mosquitoes. If a mosquito were caught off guard and stung, it could burn a person to ashes from the inside out. What could a bloodbat do? They couldn't be eaten or fought. Keeping them was a waste of food. Seeing that she had no intention of keeping the bloodbats, they could only continue forward with their sabers and kill the remaining bloodbats. The path became a little smoother. The group panted heavily as they followed behind the energetic fellows from the top academies, rushing into the depths of the cave. The deeper they went, the wider their field of vision became. It was as if they had entered a gourd. In front of them was a thin opening. After walking for a while, they entered the belly of the fat gourd. Naturally, their field of vision opened up. Arbor didn't think too much. She removed the invisibility talismans on the students from the top academies and walked forward with them. To be honest, if the poisonous mosquitoes hadn't suddenly appeared, she would have led the students from the top academies into the depths of the cave. Seeing how pitiful those guys from the Sunlight Academy were, he couldn't help but lend them a hand. Humph. The Sunlight Academy student, who had just been bitten by a mosquito, but had not started burning in his heart, hastily walked up and repeatedly thanked Qiao Mu. Everyone was in awe of Miss Qiao's medical skills. If they had thought that Starlight Academy's Master Zhou was exaggerating about Miss Qiao's medical skills, they would have slapped their own mouths. Soon, the group entered the depths of the cave. They were in a small room. This was a semi-enclosed place. When everyone moved into this small stone room, the stone door that connected to the outside fell down with a hua sound. One of the students from Frostgale Academy was shocked. He reflexively threw a punch at the stone door, but found that the stone door didn't even budge. Qiao Mu turned to look at that clown and couldn't resist rolling her eyes. Why are you knocking on the door? Are you stupid? This door, this stone room, everything here was just an illusion created by the testing environment. Only things that moved in the testing environment were real objects. If they wanted to break the door open, they had to break through this enclosed testing environment. Breaking the door was useless. At this moment, the student also understood. He raised his hand and touched the back of his head with a silly smile. I'm going to sleep. I'll go to the hospital tomorrow and come back at night. Chapter 2040. Haha. I forgot that student rubbed his head and chuckled at Arbor. Then his expression tensed up. Miss Qiao, what should we do now? Everyone looked at him, as if they were looking at an idiot. No matter how the environment changed, they were still in the simulated environment. If they wanted to leave, they had to rely on external forces to let them out, or use their own abilities to break the spiritual weapon. For the latter, it was naturally filled with difficulties. A student from the Sunlight Academy suddenly pointed to the sky and shouted, Look! Birds, so many birds! Above the dome, a large group of colorful birds were making chirping noises at this time. Oh my, are these the birds we are supposed to catch? A student from the Celestial Light Academy was the first to jump up. Without saying a word, he stretched out his hand to grab the bird on the dome. A strong gravitational force swept towards him. That person tiptoed with his left foot and exerted force with his right foot. He jumped up half a meter and could barely touch the birds on the lowest layer with one hand. However, when his hand touched a blue bird, the bird exploded on the spot and turned his hand into a bloody mess. The student let out an anguished wail and immediately rolled down from the sky, smashing heavily onto the ground. He held onto a hand that had half of its bones exposed and let out a miserable howl. Wah! Everyone cried out in surprise. The Dawn Academy instructor, who was watching from outside the transparent barrier, jumped up and glared at instructor, he from the Heavenly Bestowing Academy of the Poland Prefecture. He pointed at him and said angrily, You. Back then, the most famous academies in the 6 prefectures continent, which were the top 10 academies, worked together to set the rules for this competition. Instructor he from the Poland Prefecture's Heavenly Bestowing Academy suggested that the students could complete the 3rd test in the simulated environment. However, from the beginning to the end, this instructor he had never mentioned that the simulated environment was so dangerous, nor had he told anyone in advance what kind of dangers there would be in the simulated environment. He only said that this spiritual weapon was made by an extremely famous divine weapon master, and that the Poland Prefecture Academy had never used it. However, now it seemed that he was lying. Why didn't the students from the Poland Prefecture's Heavenly Bestowing Academy make any moves after entering the simulated environment? It was obvious that they knew about the danger beforehand. Shameless, the instructor from the Changwon Academy, who was observing from the outside, was about to explode in anger. Within a short period of time, one of the students from the Celestial Light Academy had died, and another was injured. The number of casualties was disastrous. How could the instructors of the Celestial Light Academy not be furious? As one of the top 10 academies in the 6 prefectures, why was it that the Poland Prefecture's Heavenly Bestowal Academy was able to foresee danger and avoid danger, while the others were like fools, being played around by the Heavenly Bestowal Academy? Instructor I advise you to release them immediately. The instructor from the Chungkwang Academy shouted angrily. Unexpectedly, Instructor of the Heavenly Bestowing Academy shrugged with a relaxed expression and said, Sorry, I forgot to tell you before. A faint mocking smile appeared on Instructor He's face. Once you enter this simulated environment, you won't be able to reopen the entrance with your own strength. Therefore, good luck to all of you. Instructor he from the Heavenly Bestowing Academy looked at Arbor coldly. His lips curled into a smile. Chapter 2041. Shuntian Prefecture, Wuang Mountain, Qingtian Valley. A black shadow quietly landed among the flowers and trees, hiding under the corridor. The 2 people who were approaching from afar did not notice that someone was hiding there. They slowly walked along the corridor. Auntie, He Jiao sent a message through the communication jade talisman, indicating that everything is going smoothly. A sinister voice came from the corridor. It sounded like an iron pestle hitting the ground. Dong dong dong. The sound kept coming. The person who was hiding didn't dare to look out, especially when the voices of the 2 people in the corridor got closer. They let their breaths blend into the wind and couldn't move at all. Very good. A hoarse and old female voice sounded at the same time. It's a pity that we can't use that slut's body for experiments. I'm sure that there's a very deep secret buried in that slut's body. Cough cough. Auntie, it's been 7 or 8 days, but your cough hasn't improved. Could it be that you're feeling unwell after absorbing that person's medicinal power? Xiuhi Auntie is fine. Fan Gu's old voice sounded again. She coughed a few times and said, After absorbing that person's medicinal power, it did increase the medicinal power in my body. However, the increase isn't fast. You still need to study how to make Auntie's medicinal power increase rapidly. Cough cough cough. In the future, you won't be unable to treat a small cold in your body. Yes, Auntie. Xiuhi will work hard. Fan Gu smiled proudly. Hee. After dealing with that trouble, I'll have the face to beg Master to give us a good future. Dong dong dong. The sound of the iron pestle, accompanied by Fan Gu's hoarse laughter, slowly faded away. A black-clothed young man who was hiding among the flowers stood up and glanced indifferently at the backs of the 2 people. The middle-aged woman was wearing a black veil, and she walked very slowly. The man beside her looked very old and unshaven, coupled with the fact that there was nothing under his left trouser leg, and he was holding an iron rod in his hand. He looked even more like he had experienced the vicissitudes of life. The 2 of them were Aunt Fan and her niece whom Arbor wanted dead. Ever since they parted ways at Jiaozhong Base on Sikong Star, Fan Xiuha had lost his left leg. He had always hated Arbor to the bone, and had done everything possible to get rid of him. Unfortunately, Ever since the aunt and niece realized that Arbor had ascended to the 6 prefectures continent, they had sent out several batches of people, but none of them had been able to leave Arbor as they wished. Starting from Tan Fa, they had all ended in failure. Until this time, He Jiao, a disciple of the Clear Sky sect who was hiding in the Heavenly Bestowing Academy of Poland Mansion, brought them good news. After seeing the aunt and niece leave along the corridor, the black-clothed man disappeared among the flowers in a flash. His lord had asked him to bring people to keep an eye on the Clear Sky sect's people. They didn't need to do anything. They just needed to surround them from a distance. As for other matters, there was no need for them to worry too much. At this moment, Instructor He of Poland Mansion's Heavenly Bestowing Academy suddenly threw out an item on the ground. Thick smoke immediately engulfed his entire body. He Jiao, the instructors of the Celestial Light Academy, couldn't help but shout angrily. What was wrong with this guy? Could it be that he had contributed this spirit tool just to kill so many elite students of the various academies? Although Elder Hong's movements were fast, by the time he flashed in front of He Jiao, the seating area had already been shrouded in thick smoke, blurring his vision. Chapter 2042. He Jiao let out a pitiful scream. Before he could figure out what was going on, he had already been swept away by a strong gust of cold wind, falling heavily to the ground. He did not run away. Everyone stared dumbfoundedly at the man who had fallen out of the smoke, his face almost deformed from the fall. A black shadow flashed, and the cold light of the dark moon sword was already pointed at He Jiao's throat. If it was just a hair's breadth away, it would have taken his life. He Jiao's entire body stiffened, not daring to move in the slightest. The aura of the person in front of him was too strong. He did not dare to move. He was afraid that if he moved, the next step would be the sword in his hand that would take his dog life. Your Excellency, I don't know what is the meaning of this. Pung! A fist wind came from the side, landing heavily on He Jiao's face. He immediately let out a pitiful scream, rolling on the ground like a salted fish. In an instant, his stomach was stepped on by someone's foot, heavily pressing him to the ground. The upper half of his body that had wanted to straighten up was once again stepped on by someone. Yo, you casually created some smoke to fool the eyes, and you think you can escape from my boss's hands? Dao Wuji stepped on the Heavenly Bestowing Academy's teacher He, a smiling expression on his face. Do you think everyone is as stupid as you? Dao Wuji used the back of his sword to lightly pat He Jiao's cheek. He Jiao did not escape. At this time, he was lying on the ground trembling. His eyes were filled with fear, almost popping out of their sockets. Mo Lian held the dark moon sword in her hand, staring coldly at the salted fish on the ground. You are looking for death. He Jiao's body trembled violently. At the same time, everyone in the testing area was frightened by the person from the Celestial Light Academy. He had clearly only been injured by the blue bird, but now that he was rolling on the ground, his bones seemed to have softened, shrinking inch by inch, until he was like a boneless noodle lying on the ground. The scene in front of them made many of the female disciples cry out in fear. Some of them were so disgusted that they turned around and vomited. How was it possible to turn a living person into a smooth strand of noodles? No one knew. And of course, no one dared to go up and look for those bright and colorful little birds to try. Everyone huddled together and looked at Arbor in unison. The female disciple from the Chengwang Academy who had insulted Arbor asked in a trembling voice, "And Miss Chiao, can he still be saved?" Li Lu pointed at the man who was lying on the ground, as if he had lost all his marrow. Arbor shook his head. He used the handkerchief to wrap the man's arm, lifted it up, and threw it. The man's arm fell to the ground like a soft noodle. All the bones in his body are shattered. Arbor looked at the man on the ground sympathetically. Unless you have the bone sculpting divine pill, there's nothing you can do. As for things like the bone molding divine pill, it was still not something she could produce at the moment. At the very least, he was lacking in medicinal herbs. Everyone nodded in understanding, and Lila didn't say anything else. Although the people from the Chengwang Academy sympathized with their fellow disciple, they couldn't force a little girl to be treated. Sigh. Everyone sighed. Li Lu and the noodle man looked at each other with pleading eyes, and turned to Arbor. Chapter 2043. Miss Chiao, can I ask you for a favor? Lila was silent for a long time before he said, Can you give me a poison pill so that I can send him away? This person already had no chance of prolonging his life. Forcing him to drag on would only make him suffer more. Rather than that, it would be better for her to send him on his way. Everyone was silent in response. The noodle man's painful and twisted expression, as well as his pleading eyes, were all seen in their eyes. Only Lila said such words. Arbor glanced at the girl. She was a very thin person, and couldn't be said to be very good-looking. Just now, when they were fighting the blood bats, she had even argued with her, saying that she didn't do anything, that even such a young girl had her own softness in her heart. Arbor nodded, and raised his hand to throw her a black pill. Lila nodded at her, and turned to look at his classmate whose cheekbones were sunken in. It was very difficult for him to even show an expression. Stealing his heart, he sealed the black pill in that person's mouth with one hand, and tightly covered his mouth with another. He turned his head away, unable to bear to look. Captain Duanmu, what should we do now? Wuxia from the Sunlight Academy asked with a slightly gloomy expression. They felt as if they had been cheated by someone. They had participated in the third competition in this testing environment, but they didn't expect that 2 people would die in succession. This situation made everyone feel that something was wrong. They were all young people, and the more outstanding ones among the young people. None of them were fools. How could they not know that there was something strange about this? The captain of the Heavenly Bestow Academy stood at the back of the crowd with his 5 team members. He glanced at them indifferently and gave his team members a look. The 6 of them quietly retreated to the side, not wanting to get involved in this matter. Most of them were the substitutes brought along. If it weren't for Shen Xinran and Zhuang Meng's group, of course, they wouldn't have had to go up. As for this test, Mentor he had told them not to touch any living things in the testing environment as much as possible, and to delay as much time as possible. Once the time was up, Mentor he would open the shield outside and let them out. Thus, compared to the impatient appearances of the students from the other academies, the members of the Heavenly Bestow Academy appeared to be very calm. Then do we need to catch more birds? Feng Tong from the Sunlight Academy asked weakly. Are you stupid? Wuxia rolled her eyes at him. Look at the state we're in now. What's the point of catching a bird? Whoever went up would die. You're asking for trouble. I don't know what kind of ghost birds these are, but why are they so harmful to the human body when they explode? Everyone have an idea. Duanmu Qing suddenly shouted. Increase the defense. Everyone combine the defensive barriers. The birds above are about to swoop down. What? Everyone was shocked, and at the same time, they waved their own defensive shields. No matter if it was a defensive profound artifact or a spirit artifact, all of them were activated. At this moment, everyone was clearly of one mind, working together to deal with the birds in the sky. Even the students of the Heavenly Bestow Academy, who had been calm and composed, were dumbfounded at this moment. They hurriedly returned to the main group and simultaneously activated their defensive spiritual artifacts. Chapter 2044. It was no wonder that the Heavenly Bestowing Academy students were panicking. Tutor he clearly didn't tell them this before they entered the testing environment. Why were the birds above them still swooping down at this moment? No one cared about what the Heavenly Bestowing Academy students were thinking. With a wave of their hands, a thick defensive barrier appeared in front of them. At this moment, there were already dozens of birds flying down from the sky. Arbor raised her hand and threw out a circle of ebony defensive talismans to block the sky. With a loud boom 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 boom, the birds exploded one after another, shattering the hundreds of defensive talismans in front of them. Everyone saw it clearly, and not a single one of them wasn't terrified. However, the flock of birds had already descended from the sky, and no one had time to think about other things. At this moment, all their attention was on how to block the attacks of the birds. Qi Xianxian couldn't help but smile bitterly. I didn't think that there would be a day when we would be attacked by these bright and beautiful little fellows. And they were covered in dirt and grime so miserably. What the hell are these? Master, I have a way to subdue these little fellows. Just as Arbor was concentrating on dealing with the birds, she suddenly heard a small and happy voice from her conscious. Master, do you want to raise a few explosive birds? On the other side, Duan Muqing's voice was cold as he said, I have read about it in books before. Some unconventional clans are very good at raising poisonous insects or low-grade spirit beasts in groups. Although these spirit beasts levels are not high, they always appear in groups and often cause great harm to humans. If there are no accidents, only the Li family of the underworld region's Thousand Poisons family will raise these birds. Duan Muqing said coldly, Everyone be careful. These little fellows look very harmless, but after they explode, the damage to the human body is very great. Also, they have extremely strong corrosive toxins. Oh, little Fatty came to a sudden realization. If that's the case, the student from the Chunguang Academy had exposed a large portion of his hand not because of the explosion, but because the surface of his skin was corroded by the explosive bird? Duan Muqing nodded and turned to look at Arbor. Jojo, how many defensive talismans do we have left? How long can we last? Arbor frowned and communicated with Xiao Xiao for a while. I can take them all away. Ah, would they explode inside the storage talisman? What if we rush out again? Mata asked worriedly. That's not a good idea. If worst comes to worst, we can just continue to hold on. Don't slack off, Sunlight Academy's Su Liang said. Since she said she has a way to take it away, why don't we let her take it away? Peng Guang of Moonlight Academy screamed. Peng Guang! The Moonlight Academy team leader glared at him. You talk too much. Just do your job well. Arbor looked at Duan Muqing and the others indifferently. It's fine. I have a way to deal with it. Qi Xianxian hurriedly tugged at her sleeve and said in a low voice, You can't keep them inside. These things are too powerful. If they are destroyed, it would be a loss. Don't worry. Arbor patted her hand comfortingly. I know what I'm doing. Qi Xianxian, little Fatty, and the others all knew that Jojo wanted to take these explosive birds into Paradise Planet, so they were very worried. Chapter 2045. They didn't know if these exploding birds would negatively affect that paradise that was as beautiful as a fairyland. They didn't wish for that paradise to be destroyed by these disgusting exploding birds. That would be too heart-wrenching. It's fine. Arbor gave Duan Muqing and the others a calm gaze and said a few more words to Xiao Xiao. Then, with a wave of her hand, she drew in an endless stream of spiritual conscious and sucked all the exploding birds into the paradise's 100 Poison Valley. Just as the exploding birds, who had changed their environment in the blink of an eye, were about to explode collectively, they saw a dense swarm of poison-tailed butterflies crazily rush forward and surround them. Xiaomu was still a bit worried, so she enveloped a radius of 50 kilometers from top to bottom of 100 Poison Valley with her spiritual conscious. Once Xiao Xiao couldn't suppress these little things, and the exploding birds wanted to make a move, she would at most spend a large amount of spiritual conscious to suppress them. But in this way, if she expended too much spiritual conscious, it would cause her to be mentally exhausted for a short period of time. On the other side, the miserable He Jiao trembled all over, as if he was having an epileptic seizure. Under Mo Lian's soul-searching palm, his entire body trembled. Before long, Mo Lian threw away the man in her hand like she was throwing away trash. She didn't even spare him a glance as he foamed at the mouth. She directly reached out and sucked the spiritual energy ring that was originally on Hong Qi's finger into her palm. She threw out a bronze cauldron from her inner world and immediately sucked that ring in. With a light press of the cauldron, Mo Lian struck out a wisp of black fire. Everyone only saw a black flame scuttle out from the bottom of the bronze cauldron. The temperature of the entire room seemed to have been ignited and rose by quite a bit. When the mentors from the other schools saw his actions, they couldn't help but be speechless. Even Mentor Zhou Danjin and the others were a bit shocked. Only Yu Gui and Chun Hanzi from the Holy Water sect were completely unperturbed. If they had known earlier that the Crown Prince's artificing skills were superb, those defective golems from back then could beat them until their hands hurt. That what's the problem with reforging this spiritual artifact ring? The bronze cauldron operated for nearly half a quarter of an hour. Suddenly, the lid of the cauldron was slapped open by his hand. A gust of steam was emitted from the cauldron, and a small golden ring was spat out with a puff. Prince Imo squeezed it in his hand as if he was squeezing an ant. His handsome face was cold. With just a light pinch of 2 fingers, everyone was frightened to hear a subtle kacha sound. What followed was chi xian xian, uxian, and the others' cries of io io. Caught off guard, the people from Arbor felt as if they had been hit by a hammer in the testing environment. One after another, they landed in the ring. With a slight movement of his ink robes, Imo Lian's tall and slender figure abruptly appeared beside Xiao Mu, and he pulled her into his embrace. Xiao Qiao. He heaved a sigh of relief and raised his hand to stroke her hair. He looked at her gently and asked, "Are you hurt?" "No." Arbor reached out to grab his finger. Just now, Imo Lian was too impatient and directly used his hand to slap open the cauldron's lid. As a result, his fingertip was scalded and left a red mark. "Are you stupid? What could happen to me?" Arbor grumpily glared at him. I'm worried about my JoJo." He hugged her and gently patted her. What should he do? It seemed like his heart would only be at ease if he hugged her. Chapter 2046. Arbor raised his head to look at him. Then his gaze suddenly drifted to the side. When this person spoke, his doting demeanor and gentle tone, coupled with that peerlessly beautiful face, inexplicably made people flustered. Miss Chiao felt her little heart pounding in her chest, as if it was about to jump out. Calm down, calm down." The little fellow silently chanted these 2 words in the depths of her heart. She reached out a small paw and stroked his face. "Don't worry, I'm fine." Not only was this test daunting, but she even gained a bunch of interesting little fellows. It could be said that the risk was worth it. Imo Lian wanted to laugh, but he held back. He reached out to take her little paw and held it in his hand. "Jojo." Chirp. He openly kissed his little wife's face. He leaned close to her ear and whispered a few words. Then his gaze shifted to He Jiao, who was lying on the ground and laughing foolishly. Arbor's gaze turned cold, and he followed his gaze. "It's this person." Imo Lian nodded and said in a low voice. "It's confirmed without a doubt that he's from the Clear Sky sect." In the process of searching his soul, he discovered Fan Xiuhua and his aunt. They're in Clear Sky Valley right now? Arbor's eyes lit up. It was truly a case of searching high and low for something, only to find it by chance. If Fan Xiuhua and his aunt were willing to obediently hide in Clear Sky Valley, it would be convenient for her to settle accounts with them. "Everyone come over." Zhou Dan sighed in relief and waved at them with a smile. "Are you all alright?" Fortunately, it was a close call. The person who schemed against you has now been taken care of by His Highness the Crown Prince. Wei Wei also nodded and said, "The points are out. Let's go take a look." Someone called out, and everyone rushed to the place where the rankings were announced. First place in the Academy ranking tournament, Ani Prefecture's Jiaqing Academy's Li Nanshan's team. Second place in the Academy ranking tournament, Shuntian Prefecture's Moonlight Academy's Zhou Zhao's team. As for third place, it wasn't one of the top 10 academies in the 6 prefectures continent, but a dark horse that jumped up. Shuntian Prefecture's top academy. Third place in the overall strength rankings of the Academy ranking tournament. This made many people's jaws drop, including those who were not optimistic about them. As for the individual ranking, Arbor was ranked third. After all, Li Nanshan's cultivation was much higher than hers. Her third-level cultivation dragged down her points by quite a bit. This was the reason why the instructors were looking at her with disdain. The spirit realm was so good, and the cultivation resources were hundreds and thousands of times better than other people's. But he didn't work hard. All the mentors looked at her with a look that said they expected better from her. This caused Miss Chiao to look down at her clothes many times. Strange, she didn't wear it inside out. Wei Wei secretly kicked Instructor Zhou. The latter turned around and glared at him. He braced himself and stepped forward. "Student Xiao, the instructors have discussed and decided to focus on training you in the coming days." Arbor looked at him impassively. "In the next year, I hope you can live up to the expectations of your mentors." You can still improve your cultivation. Wei Wei kicked him again. Instructor Zhou was so angry that he changed his words. Well, the instructors plan to let you improve a lot. It's best if you can reach the cultivation of a 7th or 8th level spirit master. Everyone looked at Instructor Zhou, as if they were looking at a god. How can you boast like this? Little Qiao is currently a 3rd level spirit master. Chapter 2047. Let her raise her cultivation by 5 ranks in the next year. Haha, your entire family. Everyone rolled their eyes silently in their hearts, but they didn't say anything. Arbor still looked at them expressionlessly. Don't wander around if you don't have anything special to do. Instructor Zhou. Chao Yen from the Sunlight Academy walked over with a smile on his face. Congratulations to all of you. You have obtained the right to use Brinset Island's spirit domain for the next 3 years. You will also receive a large amount of resources from the island. Zhou Danjin naturally smiled so widely that his teeth could be seen. Well said, well said. You let us win. Chao Dan smiled as he glanced at Zhou Danjin, Wei Wei, and the others. He shook his head and said, everyone is too modest. The students of your academy are all extraordinarily talented and intelligent. In the future, your names will definitely shake the 6 prefectures. Ahahaha. Instructor Zhou originally wanted to exchange some pleasantries with Chao Yen, but in the end, he only heard his immodest laughter. After the ranking competition ended, early the next morning, everyone impatiently set off for Brinset Island. Looking at the expectant smiles on the young faces of the students, Arbor raised his hand and touched the round droplet on his palm. He said softly, let's wait for the 15th day. There was no need to rush at this moment. At the very least, she had to let these people cultivate for 15 days. Once she refined the entire spirit realm, then everyone would be very disappointed. Master Silver, don't be anxious. Little Tree's body is already slowly recovering. Arbor nodded slightly. The dark spirit jade vein that he had found in Mount Daizong had been given to the little tree. It was obvious that after the little tree absorbed the dark spirit jade daily, its withered trunk and leaves had improved a little. However, this was far from enough to support its recovery. After all, this tree was supporting the entire star domain, even when it was unconscious. The spirit energy in the star domain couldn't be used too much at this time, lest Little Tree's origin was damaged again. If large amounts of spirit energy from Brinset Island's 3 spirit domains were injected into Paradise Planet, Arbor's heart warmed slightly. There was hope for the little tree to wake up. A flock of seabirds flew over the surface of the sea, flapping their wings as they glided across the surface of the water, leaving behind a trail of cool water droplets that sprinkled on her cheeks. Are you cold, Jojo? Emolien lifted her sleeve to wipe off the water droplets on the little girl's face and held her little hand. After all, it was almost the end of December. The air was filled with the smell of salty and slightly cold seawater. The wind was blowing, and it was already a little cold. Emolien took out a cloak made of gold and silver silk and put it on the little fellow. Her slender fingers went through the thin belt and lowered her head to fasten a buckle for her. Winter will probably come early this year. I heard that the winters in the 6 prefectures aren't that great. Emolien pulled her into his arms and stroked her back. But don't worry. I'm here. Jojo won't catch a cold. Arbor. Where did this drama queen come from? She was a level 3 spirit master, with an immortal bone constitution. How could she be afraid of the cold? I have the sacred fire body. Emolien whispered in her ear. It's best to hug and keep warm in winter. Arbor's little mouth twitched. She looked like she wanted to laugh but couldn't. This guy really had enough. Emolien lowered his head with a smile and rubbed her cheek. Chapter 2048. Jojo. Every word I say comes from the bottom of my heart. Arbor suddenly reached out and hugged his waist, rubbing against him with all her might. You can hug me for as long as you want. No need to find excuses. Miss Chow stretched out her hands with the I'll let you hug me expression. Emolien glanced at her and couldn't help but be amused. The little fellow's asking for a hug look was too seductive. No, this look that could melt one's heart couldn't be casually seen by others. Emolienne pettily used her cloak to cover the little fellow's head, reached out and carried her horizontally, and quickly walked towards their small bedroom in the cabin. Jojo, it's windy outside, let's talk inside. Arbor looked at the sky and looked at the clear sky in the distance, then turned to look at Emolienne. Suddenly, she opened her small mouth and bit his lips. Prince Emo was completely stunned, and the footsteps he took also froze slightly. The little fellow turned to look at him, and her gaze drifted away. Of course, she wouldn't tell this fellow that just now, in that instant, she had inexplicably impulsively wanted to pounce on him, hug him, and take a big bite out of him. What was this saying? It was probably called wine doesn't intoxicate you, but you get drunk on yourself. Clearly, they hadn't drunk, but looking at the handsome face in front of her, Arbor's vision clearly became somewhat blurry. For the next 15 days or so, everyone was in the 3 spirit regions on Brinthet Island, doing their best to absorb the spiritual energy and seize the time to cultivate. Rather than saying that Brinthet Island was an island, it was better to say that it was a group of islands. The spirit regions that were developed were probably less than 1/10 the size of the entire Brinthet Island. Everyone said that there were 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 spirit regions on Brinthet Island. However, everyone's naked eyes might not be able to detect them. 15 days later, under the protection of Emolienne, He-chun and the others, Arbor began to refine the largest spirit region on the island. Her refinement of the mystic realm could be said to have reached the point of perfection. Of course, the size of the secret realm and the amount of spiritual power would also affect the time she needed to condense the secret realm. Normally, the refining process would be completed within 2 hours. If everything went smoothly, it would only take about an hour. As the spirit energy of heaven and earth surged wildly and shook, the vast spirit realm Arbor was and began to crack bit by bit, until a white jade bead appeared in Arbor's hand. The entire spirit realm instantly collapsed into nothingness. The group of people from Moonlight Academy, who were seizing the time to cultivate in spirit realm, opened their eyes in confusion. At this moment, Arbor was already running towards the smallest of the 3 spirit realms. After spending more than half an hour to refine the small spiritual domain, at this time on the island, there was already a puzzled noise. Arbor left the last spirit realm to everyone. After all, everyone had gone through many difficult matches, and it wasn't easy for them to get a chance to cultivate in spirit realm. She'd better stop before going too far. What the hell is going on? Instructor Chao Dan of Sunlight Academy jumped up from his chair, as if his buttocks were on fire. That's right. Why are the cultivation domains collapsing one after another out of nowhere? Only this last spirit realm is left. It won't also collapse, right? Zhou Dan asked worriedly. Everyone looked at each other. Chapter 2049. Arbor stood expressionlessly in the crowd. No one could see the slightest emotion on her face. This child wore a stoic expression, as if nothing had happened, as she watched everyone argue for a long time, without coming to a conclusion. She couldn't help but say helplessly, rather than arguing here for half a day, why don't we quickly enter the remaining spirit realm and cultivate properly? Instructor Wei Wei nodded approvingly. Well said. Now that there was only one spirit realm left that could be used, the remaining students, who added up to about 20 people, entered together. Arbor gave Emolienne a look, and left the spirit realm like a wisp of smoke. Little Water, can you help me integrate these 2 spirit realms into Paradise Planet? Arbor asked with a serious expression. Previously, Little Ball had helped her integrate the refined secret realms into the star realm. Although the integration process wasn't wonderful, as long as she could help Little Ball, she would do anything. I can master Silver. However, if you integrate 2 spirit realms into the star realm at the same time, this way, it will be quite painful. Master Silver. Little Water Child fiddled with 2 thick carrot-like hands and asked, do you still want to continue? Arbor nodded resolutely. We can begin. Naturally, it would take a certain amount of time to transfer all the spirit energy from the 2 spirit realms into Paradise Planet. During this time, Emolienne, Hushirchen, and the others could only silently guard her. Seeing her frown in pain, and her fists involuntarily clenched tightly. They knew that the feeling of the spirit energy injection was definitely not pleasant. Unfortunately, there were many people present, and no one could bear it for her. This time, the process of injecting spirit energy into Paradise Planet took more than 4 hours. Fortunately, in the later stages, Little Ball seemed to have gained a trace of self-awareness and was also desperately absorbing the spirit energy that was being injected into Paradise Planet. As a result, Arbor felt a lot more relaxed, and the pain was also reduced. It seemed that the sapling had helped her relieve some of the pain, making her feel a little better during the process. After successfully injecting all the spiritual energy from the 2 spirit domains into Paradise Planet, Arbor opened a pair of cold eyes and immediately met the worried gazes of everyone. While Arbor was injecting her spirit, Instructor Zhou and the others, who were slow to realize what was going on, took the initiative to walk over and silently guard her. Seeing her open her eyes, everyone was overjoyed. "Jojo, are you all right?" Qi Xianxian asked as she held her hand. Arbor nodded and jumped up. Moving his little arms and legs, he looked down at himself, and his eyes lit up. "I've advanced." He wouldn't have known if he didn't mention it, but now that he did, he was shocked. Instructor Zhou and the others stared at her in confusion. After sizing her up, they couldn't help but cry out. Level 4 Spirit Master? This little brat had advanced without a sound or movement. Oh, of course, it couldn't be said that there was no movement. During the process of injecting spirit, all the spirit energy within 100 miles was absorbed by her. But how could it be so easy to advance? Arbor was also very happy. It was probably because the sapling had accidentally leaked some spirit energy from the spirit domains to her when it was absorbing it. She was also a pitiful child that, opening her inner vision, she found that the sapling's branches and leaves had become very green. It was obviously a huge change from its previous listless appearance. Wake up and make up for it. Chapter 2050. Qiu. Arbor happily called out to him a few times. Seeing that he didn't respond, she wasn't discouraged. After injecting such a large amount of spiritual energy into the star domain today, in addition to the water child helping Qiu absorb the black spirit jade every day, Xiaomu believed that Qiu would definitely be able to recover to normal in at most 2 to 3 months. It might even be able to advance further. "Instructor, I have some personal matters to take care of. Will you continue to cultivate in the spirit domain on Brinset Island?" "Let's go together." Zhou Danjin made a prompt decision. What kind of joke was this? If not for Li Nanshan and the others, they would have gone to Fish Orchid Planet to cultivate long ago. After all, cultivating for a day on Fish Orchid Planet was only 2 hours in the outside world. Cultivating for 12 days was only 1 day in the outside world. This was a lot of extra cultivation time for nothing. In a world where time was a cultivation resource, a spirit domain where time flowed 12 times faster than the outside world was practically a miracle. Xiaomu nodded when she heard this. She had already successively taken in 2 spiritual domains from Brinset Island, so she would leave the remaining spiritual domain for the other academies to cultivate properly. Her companions also did not need to compete with others for this pitiful amount of resources. Thinking about it, Li Nanshan and the others were quite pitiful. They worked so hard in so many competitions, but in the end they didn't gain much. Miss Qiao silently sympathized with them. Expressionlessly, she said to Instructor Zhou and the others, "Then go to Fish Orchid Planet to cultivate. Second martial uncle, senior sister, you should go as well. Cultivate well during this time. I'll have little water temporarily block the star domain." When the time came, the instructors naturally wouldn't know that she was going to clear Sky Valley to kill people. "Jojo, what are you going to do?" Yang Shirong walked up and took her small hand. "Is there any danger?" "Martial uncle, don't worry. I will accompany Jojo." Prince Emo pointed at Ji Chun, little Taisui, and the others. "And them? Who's your martial uncle?" "Stinky brat." Yang Shirong glared at Prince Emo angrily and raised her hand to rub her little martial nephew's head. "Don't put yourself in danger. If there's anything you need help with, just tell us." Arbor nodded and looked at Yang Shirong with bright eyes. It's just a small matter. I can handle it alone. Ciao. Before Qi Xianxian could say anything, she saw Arbor turn around and throw a porcelain bottle at her. Go into seclusion. Come see me after you've broken through to the spirit realm. With that, he asked Holy Water Diandian to pull everyone into Fish Orchid Star to cultivate in seclusion. Master Silver, do you want to shield the entire starfield? Arbor nodded decisively. After the shield, other than the contract beasts that were connected to Arbor, all the people and beasts in the star field would not be able to see or hear what was going on outside the star field. She was going to kill someone that he could not let second Uncle Master and senior sisters see his ferocious and evil look. She had always been a good baby in the hearts of her Uncle Master and senior sisters, that because she didn't know what she would do next. Are you ready? Fan Xiuha, do you see the Grim Reaper waving at you? The pain of being chiseled into my body in my previous life, the resentment of being hunted down in this life, the hatred of being surrounded and killed. Everything that you owe me will be paid back to me stroke by stroke. Chapter 2051. You! A gentle voice came from behind them. Arbor, who was about to summon Qing Wan, turned his head and met Li Nanshan's eyes. Aren't you going to continue cultivating? I have something to do, Arbor said calmly. That. The rewards for the top 100 will be given out in 2 days, Li Nanshan said. Can I send someone to deliver them to your top academy? Sure. Arbor didn't care. The rewards were just some cultivation resources. It was fine to send them to the academy's vice dean. The academy was so poor. It could help them for a while. Miss Chiao. Mo Lian's gaze hardened, and he turned to Li Nanshan, who had called out to Chiao Mu again, with impatience in his eyes. Can you tell me the level of your spiritual sense? A level 3 spiritual master, with a higher spiritual sense than a level 12 great spiritual master. He had never heard of or seen such a situation before. He was very curious. Or rather, everyone was very curious. Unfortunately, spiritual sense was an illusory thing. Apart from the person who knew it better, outsiders generally didn't know. Xiao Mu gazed at him silently. Level 7. Li Nanshan's eyes narrowed. I'm level 8 now. When she said this, not only Li Nanshan, but even Dao Wuji and the others stared at her, as if they were looking at a strange little monster. Everyone's common sense was the same. Spiritual sense couldn't exceed 60% of cultivation. But this little girl's spiritual sense was several levels higher than her cultivation. Was she sure she wasn't a monster? How can that be? Li Nanshan muttered to herself. After Arbor finished speaking, he turned and flew onto the golden dragon's back with Mo Lian. Dao Wuji looked sympathetically at Li Nanshan, who had suffered a great blow, and followed along with the venerable Peach Blossom Immortal and little Tai Sui. Seventh Yin roared and swept its tail in joy, carrying everyone away from the island. Li Nanshan stood there in a daze for a long time. Then she laughed bitterly. This is a true genius. Compared to her, any other genius paled in comparison. Being able to obtain first place in this ranking competition was largely due to his cultivation being much higher than Miss Chiao's. However, it was only a matter of time. If Miss Chiao had been at his age, perhaps that he should have broken through to the deity realm long ago. Arbor didn't know that he had given Li Nanshan a big blow. Little Tai Sui couldn't help but chuckle. Idiot, look at him. After learning the truth, he's going to be affected by it instead. If a crack appears in my conscience because of this, then I won't have much of a future. The venerable Peach Blossom Immortal fanned himself and shook his head with a smile. That's why the more you know, the faster you'll die. Arbor was slightly taken aback. That can't be. Could such a small blow crush Li Nanshan? Mo Lian reached out and pulled the little fellow to sit down. He raised his hand and pointed to the sky. Jojo, accompany your husband to enjoy the scenery. It was such a good time to talk about an outsider. Wouldn't that spoil the mood? The venerable Peach Blossom Immortal waved his fan behind the two of them. This venerable pinches his fingers and divines. Soon, the sky will be filled with the glow of the sunset, and the scenery will be infinitely beautiful. Arbor looked up into the distance. Sure enough, the glow of the sunset soon filled the horizon, dyeing it with magnificent colors. Amidst everyone's laughter, Little Seven wagged his dragon tail and somersaulted, passing through the colorful clouds. The next morning, the golden dragon's figure silently appeared on Mount Wuwang. Chapter 2052. Everyone jumped down from the dragon's back and quietly entered the dense forest of Mount Wuwang. Master Tong, who had been summoned by Emolien's secret order, silently appeared in front of everyone and respectfully bowed to Emolien. Please follow this subordinate. Dao Wuji and the others immediately understood. Evidently, before boss brought them here, he had already sent people to monitor someone on this mountain. Without another word, Tong led Emolien and the others to the entrance of Qingtian Valley with familiarity. He pointed down at a verdant valley that seemed to be inverted. It's there. From here, it's about 300 steps away from Fanxioha's courtyard. Emolien nodded and swept an indifferent glance over Tong. Pass down my order. Kill everyone in the valley without mercy. Tong didn't ask anything, and only cupped his fists in response. Then, he led a group of black-clothed youths who had scuttled out of the dense forest and stealthily killed their way into Qingtian Valley, where the Clear Sky sect disciples were gathered in the rear courtyard. Soon, Emolien and the others heard the deafening roars of killing coming from afar. Arbor narrowed his cold eyes and said to Prince Emo in a low voice, "Find Fanxioha and leave him to me." Okay. Emolien nodded without another word. The group followed the mountain path into Qingtian Valley and headed for the courtyard that Tong had pointed out. Before they reached the courtyard, Arbor saw a black shadow jump out from the courtyard wall and flee into the depths of the flowers and trees as fast as the wind. Humph! Arbor snorted coldly and released dozens of poison-tailed butterflies with a flick of his hand, ordering them to chase after the shadow. Even at this point he still wanted to run away. This Fanxioha was truly regressing as he lived. Arbor's figure flashed, and he flew over a patch of flowers. With a few leaps he caught up to Fanxioha. Upon closer inspection, this guy had indeed lost his left leg, so it was very inconvenient for him to escape. At this moment, he was leaning on an iron rod, and most of his body weight was on that pitiful iron rod. A pair of triangular eyes, like a poisonous snake, coldly stared at him. Why are you targeting me again and again? Fanxioha suddenly couldn't bear it any longer and cursed. Lien, help me capture that old woman Fangu. All right. Don't worry, with me here, she won't be able to escape. Emolien nodded. She turned around and led little Taisui, Shichen, and the others toward the source of the commotion. Fangu, as the main person in charge, would definitely rush to the disciples' courtyards to check what was going on as soon as possible after such a big change occurred in Qingtian Valley. Arbor, on the other hand, was busy dealing with this person, so he could not attend to Fangu for the time being. Seeing the group of people running away from Arbor, Fanxioha's eyes flashed slightly, and his lips cracked open, revealing a devilish smile. Arbor, you're too arrogant. If Prince Emo had not left, he Fanxioha would have to be wary of her. But now only Arbor remained here. He really didn't know whether to laugh at her naivety or say that Prince Emo was too confident in Arbor. You think you can keep me here? Fanxioha snorted coldly. Unfortunately, just as he was about to activate the defensive barrier, he vaguely saw 60 ebony talismans suddenly appear around him. What? Fanxioha was completely dumbfounded. Just now there was clearly nothing around him. How could so many talismans suddenly appear around him in an instant? Chapter 2053. What on earth was going on? Before Fanxioha had time to ponder, Arbor activated the talismans with a cold gaze. In an instant, the explosion talismans exploded beside him. Even though Fanxioha had opened his defensive barrier in the nick of time, he still couldn't withstand the powerful force of so many explosion talismans at the same time. Fanxioha was sent flying by this enormous force. Just as he landed heavily on the ground, the little girl's figure shooting towards him appeared in his narrowed eyes. Without any explanation, she took out her ferrule and smashed it down on Fanxioha's head, almost making him doubt his life. Cough, 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 cough. Fanxioha coughed painfully and couldn't help but exclaim, Auntie, Auntie, Auntie. Call me Auntie. It's no use even if I call you Mom. A merciless light surfaced in Xiaomu's eyes, and she abruptly struck down with her palm, leaving a bright red handprint on Fan Xiuha's left cheek. Shut up. Arbor flipped her hand and took out a red pill. If you make any more noise, I'll poison you until you're completely mute. Fan Xiuha's pupils contracted. He tightly shut his mouth and pressed his teeth against his upper lip. He was so scared that he didn't dare to open his mouth. Let's go. Arbor was just about to bind Fan Xiuha with the spirit-binding rope. Suddenly, he took out something from his sleeve and ruthlessly smashed it on the ground. Arbor sneered. She didn't dodge or evade. With a wave of her hand, hundreds of defensive talismans surrounded her body. The powerful aura from the explosion of the spiritual energy ball had no effect on her at all. It was all blocked by the defensive talisman array. Moreover, this was only a level 4 spiritual energy ball. Its effect was definitely inferior to that of a high-level spiritual energy ball. Arbor's lips curled into a mocking smile. The spirit-binding rope in her hand was like a slithering snake. In a short moment, she had tied up Fan Xiuha's hands and firmly held one end of the rope. Tightening and pulling, she directly dragged Fan Xiuha, who had fallen to the ground, to her feet like a dead dog. Fan Xiuha's body rubbed against the rough ground. The humiliation almost suffocated him. Arbor grabbed the ferrule and smacked it down on his right cheek. Run. I'll let you run again. Cough, 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 cough. Fan Xiuha felt that a few of his teeth had been broken by the little girl's ruler. His face was bruised and swollen. He looked at her in confusion and accused angrily. Arbor, don't go too far. What kind of enmity does my Fan clan have with you for you to be so vicious as to kill all of our clansmen? Arbor was infuriated. Without any explanation, he switched to a metal rod and smashed it on Fan Xiuha's legs, stomach, arms, and even his face. What enmity? How could a scumbag like you not know? Shouldn't I be the one asking you? What kind of enmity do you have with me? Why have you been unwilling to let me go all these years? You scum. Today, I will let you know what it feels like to be cut open with your own hands. When she said this, there seemed to be a cluster of flames dancing between her delicate eyebrows. But her gaze was even colder than 10,000-year-old ice as she stared at him. Such an opposite contradiction appeared on her body, causing people to be unable to help but suffocate at her beauty. Miss Chow, don't be too agitated. Fan Xiuha could not help but swallow his saliva as he hurriedly said. Speaking of which, it was because of a small misunderstanding that we. Fan Xiuha's flesh was lacerated from the whipping of the water spirit whip. Chapter 2055. He didn't expect that although Emolien's party seemed to have left, they still left behind such a formidable expert. Actually, it was also his own stupidity. How could Crown Prince Emo be at ease leaving Xiaomu here alone, when faced with such a cunning person, who had repeatedly tried to take Xiao Xiao's life? Naturally, he had to leave someone here to watch. Fan Xiuha's stupidity lay in the fact that he had wanted to kill Arbor in front of the venerable Peach Blossom Immortal, even though he knew that he had no chance of winning. Wasn't this just going to the latrine with a lantern and looking for shit? What kind of experience did Jichen have? Even if Xiaomu didn't say anything to him, he already knew that this fellow sprawled on the ground and beaten beyond recognition by Xiao Xiao was definitely her longtime enemy. Since it was a longtime enemy, then he should just die quickly. Let's see how much Jojo's emotions were stifled. Let's go. Arbor kicked Fan Xiuha's back with a fierce look in his eyes. Go to your testing ground. Cough, cough, cough. If Fan Xiuha still didn't know that something had happened to his aunt that he couldn't deal with, and that his aunt might have been controlled by someone, then he would be really stupid. He dragged his battered body and walked through the garden path step by step. Arbor tugged hard at the spirit-binding rope in his hand, causing Fan Xiuha to stagger. Don't play any tricks. Your dog life is not worth a single strand of my hair. Miss Qiao said with a proud expression. If I hurt even a strand of your hair, I will open 10,000 holes in your body and use 1,000 types of poison to rot your body. But your mind will still be alive, and you will feel pain and despair every day. She spoke in such a demonic tone, yet she said such decisive and terrifying words. However, the venerable Peach Blossom Immortal actually felt that his little girl was simply cute and fierce. Her proud expression, which said, "If I don't live well, you will live 1,000 times better," did not match her tone at all. Of course, Fan Xiuhe did not sense Miss Qiao's cuteness. At this moment, he felt as if he had been immersed in an ice cellar from head to toe. He had never seen such a vile and vicious little girl before. Fan Xiuhe still did not know what was going on. The manor head ordered him to use this opportunity to get close to the little girl. But when they met for the first time at Seacone Planet's palace banquet, the little girl seemed to have gone mad, and gave him a vicious beating. At that time, he hadn't even gotten close to her, okay? Every time they met, this little girl seemed to have foresight. Not only did she look down on him, she even tried to kill him time and time again. He didn't even have the time to make a move on her, and somehow, he was in such a disadvantageous situation. Fan Xiuhe had no choice but to move aside a stone bench in the garden and lead the two people down the stairs step by step toward the Clear Sky Gates dungeon. "You scum!" When Arbor saw the tragic situation in front of him, he picked up his iron rod without a word and swung it heavily at Fan Xiuhe. Fan Xiuhe was beaten up like a torrential rain without any rhyme or reason. Other than howling miserably, Fan Xiuhe was almost unable to open his mouth to say a word. The walls of the dungeon were stained with blood, and there were many human organs hanging on them. There were also many men and women who had been stripped of their clothes and hung on the pillars as if they were goods. Some had already breathed their last. Although some still had a few weak breaths, their thoughts seemed to have been completely frozen, and they were dead. The ordinary iron rod in Arbor's hands even broke because of the strength he used to swing it. Chapter 2056. The broken end of the iron rod smashed into the wall and bounced back, rolling heavily next to Arbor's leg. Jojo. Yuan Shurchin began to worry that she might be possessed, so he hurriedly grabbed her wrist and dragged her to his side. He comforted her repeatedly. It's okay, Jojo. Calm down, Jojo." Bang! The dungeon door was kicked open again. Emolien, little Tai Sui, and the others dragged down the steps a person whose original appearance couldn't be seen, covered in blood. Tong and the others followed behind them, dragging a group of Clear Sky sect disciples who were covered in cuts and bruises, and could only wail in pain. Xiaomu once again took out an iron staff from her inner world. Without another word, she dashed up and gave that person, who was lying on the ground bathed in blood, a violent beating without allowing for any explanation. Uffed! The person on the ground turned around, and a trace of viciousness appeared on her old face covered by a black veil. Bitch. Emolien's gaze hardened, and a wisp of black fire landed on the old woman's face, burning her until she screamed and sobbed. Arbor looked at the old woman who was rolling back and forth on the ground, and a clear scene suddenly slipped through the depths of her memory. She remembered. In her previous life, she had indeed seen this old woman in Fan Xiuhe's laboratory. This old woman was an apothecary. The reason why Fan Xiuhe searched everywhere for apothecaries and studied the medicinal effects in their bodies was entirely to improve this old woman's special ability. In her previous life, Duan Muqing was ruined by this pair of bitches. Fury lingered in Arbor's heart. She picked up the rod in her hand and beat the old woman again without a word. The hatred in her heart had already uncontrollably transformed into a tangible blade that pierced into the old woman's body. Cold sweat trickled down Fangu's body. She actually felt a strange sense of fear. The entire underground prison was silent. At Emolien's signal with his gaze, Tong quickly led a group of black-clothed youths into each small prison cell, rescuing people who were covered in wounds and on the brink of death. Then, he put down the men and women tied to the pillars and moved them to the side for the time being. Arbor turned his head, and his gaze fell on the cold iron bed in the middle of the room. He suddenly said sternly, "Put him on it." Fan Xiuhe's body started to tremble uncontrollably, as if he was having a spasm. He screamed, What are you doing? Arbor, what are you doing?" Why would Tong and the others listen to his nonsense? Without another word, they dragged Fan Xiuha, who was like a dead dog, and forcefully pressed him onto the metal bed. There were 4 bronze buckles on the side of the iron bed, which happened to fasten Fan Xiuha's hands and feet. Fan Xiuha probably didn't expect that he, who had been experimenting on others, would one day become a fish on the chopping board and be tied to this iron bed. Arbor picked up a hook hanging on the wall, and the corners of her mouth suddenly curled into an extremely faint smile. She glanced at the old woman who was lying on the ground and struggling at death's door. Fangu only felt her heart turn cold. "Take it!" Tong shouted sternly and stuffed the iron hook into Fangu's hand. He lifted Fangu up and threw her to the side of the iron bed in front of Fan Xiuha. Fangu started to tremble uncontrollably. Miss Chiao clapped her hands cheerfully. "All right, you can start your performance." The hook in Fangu's hand almost slipped to the ground. "Good night." Chapter 2057. Tong forcefully pushed Fangu and coldly said, "Didn't you hear what the crown princess said? Do it." Fangu, who was holding the iron hook, knelt in front of the iron bed. Her entire body was trembling as she gasped for breath and turned her face to look at Arbor with a frightened expression. Miss Chiao slowly walked to Fangu's side and suddenly leaned over to whisper into her ear, "I know you have a daughter who lives in Shuntian Prefecture. She's about 4 or 5 years older than me, right?" Fangu's entire body stiffened out of reflex. When she turned her neck, she could even hear her own neck creaking, like the sound of a machine turning. Arbor reached out and grabbed her messy hair, forcing her to face the sky. Her scalp was stretched taut and painful from this ruthless pull. "If you want your precious daughter to live, then obediently do as I say." Arbor forcefully pushed her to the side of the iron bed and straightened up. He stared at the old woman with an ice-cold gaze and said word by word, "Open his stomach. Help him enjoy a life experience that he's never had before." Fangu's hand that was holding the hook fiercely trembled. She turned her head and fiercely said, Miss Chiao. No, crown princess, I beg you to spare us aunt and niece. I swear I won't cause any trouble for you in the future. I beg you to let us go. We can live in seclusion and never appear in front of you again." Arbor coldly stared at her, his gaze ruthless and abandoned a trace of warmth. "Men, go to Shuntian Prefecture's capital city, Pingon Street, Willow Lane number 7. No. Fangu's body violently trembled. The hand that was holding the hook fiercely trembled. Don't capture my daughter. Don't. She's just an ordinary person. She doesn't know anything. She's innocent, Shut up," Arbor angrily rebuked. With a wave of his hand, a heavy slap landed on Fangu's extremely swollen face. Her face, which had been severely burned by the black fire earlier, looked especially malevolent and twisted right now. "Do you have the face to talk to me about innocence? Could it be wasn't Arbor innocent? Wasn't her mother innocent? Weren't her younger siblings innocent? Wasn't their entire family innocent? What did she do wrong? Whose eyes did she offend? Whose path did she block? Why should she be treated like an ant and be trampled under their feet? Why should she follow the tragic path they had paved for her and continue down it? Back then, she only wanted a sliver of sunshine, but she got nothing. What was wrong with her wanting to change her fate? She wanted to start over. She wanted to torture the people who had hurt her, destroyed her, and killed her. What was wrong with that? Cause, karma, everything was the result of the original sin that they had committed. The sin that they had committed. Only by torturing them over and over again could she get rid of the demons in her heart that haunted her in both her previous and current lives. Only then would he be able to face those innocent lives in his previous life. Go to hell. The wood spirit in Arbor's hand formed a vine whip full of thorns and barbs. With a slight movement of his wrist, he heavily swung it at Fangu. "You must pay for the sins you've committed in your past life. No one can hide, no one can escape. When I crawled out of the bloody sea of hell, I told myself this. In this lifetime, no one can bully me." Chapter 2058. No one can abuse me like they did in the past. Manipulate me. Enslave me. Destroy me. Fan Xiuha, you can't. Nanny Fan, you can't either. Even if it's heaven and earth. You can't. Arbor spat out these words word by word. Her hands tightly gripped the thorny vine whip, just like her current appearance of being covered in thorns and keeping strangers away. A faint layer of mist unwittingly pervaded her cold, beautiful eyes. Emolien, Ji Chun, Little Tai Sui, Dao Wuji, the Peony Fairy, and the Ginkgo Fairy all stared blankly at the little girl before them. Do it! Aunt, don't! Aunt, don't! Ah! When the sharp iron hook cut into his lower abdomen, Fan Xiuhe only felt his nose fill with the stench of blood. So this is what it feels like to have your body cut open by someone. A malicious glint flowed out from the depths of Fan Gu's eyes. Suddenly, she poured a handful of medicinal powder into Fan Xiuhe's body. The medicinal powder sizzled in his blood and was quickly absorbed. Fan Xiuhe's limbs were bound by copper rings, but his body convulsed and trembled under the immense torment. He couldn't stop screaming. Here, pull yourself together. Here, our blood feud can only be avenged by ourselves. Here. Fan Gu screamed with all her strength, her old eyes staring fixedly at Fan Xiuhe. She couldn't let these people leave alive. She had to make them all die here. Apart from Arbor's expressionless face, everyone present was silent. Emolien, Ji Chun, Little Tai Sui, and the others all had cold gazes as they indifferently watched the monster struggling on the iron bed. Fan Xiuhe's body underwent a mutation. In a short few minutes, countless soft tentacles grew out of his body. It was as if the blood of an octopus had been absorbed into a human body, but it was also more like a living corpse. His eyes glowed with a faint green light. With two loud bangs, he struggled free of the copper rings on his wrists. Arbor's vine whip drilled out and heavily whipped Fan Xiuhe's neck. Monster! Go to hell! Dozens of confinement talismans formed a confinement talisman array, instantly locking Fan Xiuhe to the iron bed. At this moment, 17 or 18 tentacles had already grown out of Fan Xiuhe's body. They lashed out madly at Emolien, Little Tai Sui, and the others. Unfortunately, these newly grown tentacles were too weak for a group of people whose average cultivation was above the spiritual venerable realm. Countless tentacles were chopped off by Dao Wuji's machete. Arbor's whip landed heavily on Fan Xiuhe's face and pulled out a piece of flesh from his face without pity. Only the darkness of the abyss filled his cold eyes. Ah! Fan Xiuhe felt that his entire body was immersed in pain. He could no longer use words to describe how much pain his body was in. Every time one of those tentacles was chopped off, it was as if they were chopping off his limbs, scraping his bones and blood, and peeling off his flesh. Monster! Xiaomu gazed at him coldly, and a sharp ice sword abruptly extended from her long green vine whip, abruptly stabbing into Fan Xiuhe's chest. Fan Xiuhe didn't have time to break free of the copper rings on his feet. He fell back onto the iron bed, his tentacles crawling one by one. Those strange and terrifying soft tentacles drilled out of his chest, stomach, and even his head. Chapter 2059. In just a moment, Fan Xiuhe had completely turned into a living monster, completely stripped of his human appearance. Emolien stared at the freak in front of her with incomparably cold eyes, and she said word by word, "You look too disgusting. Kill him." At Emolien's command, the little Tai Sui snapped its fingers, and a huge stone palm materialized, slapping down on Fan Xiuhe's head. Bang! All of Fan Xiuhe's tentacles were crushed into meat paste. His entire body sank into great pain, and he wailed miserably. Fan Gu's entire body went limp on the ground. She didn't expect these young people's strength to be so terrifying. Even if she gave Fan Xiuhe the final strong drug, she still couldn't escape from this dungeon. Don't kill me, don't kill me. Your Highness. It has nothing to do with me. We were entrusted by others to be used by others. Crown Princess. Crown Princess. Arbor didn't want to listen to her anymore, and he turned to leave this gloomy hell. Emolien naturally wouldn't stop him. She couldn't wait for Jojo to leave this filthy place as soon as possible. Far, far away from here. Crown Princess. Let me go. Crown Princess. Fan Gu burst into tears. She crawled and rolled a few steps on the ground, but the Peony Fairy kicked her back to the metal bed. Io, don't make so much noise. You're making this fairy's ears hurt. Emolien coldly swept a glance at Fan Gu. After a moment of silence, she said indifferently, "Don't worry. I guarantee that you'll live well for the rest of your lives." She casually threw out the bronze cauldron, and a gust of wind rolled over Fan Gu's head. Fan Gu's entire body quivered, and then she let out an extremely tragic scream that a cluster of black flames burned Fan Gu and Fan Xiuhe's bodies. Emolien's cold voice sounded faintly without any warmth. "Underworld Yellow Springs. Remember to find your enemies. China's Emolien will wait for your revenge at any time." It's a pity. A soulless person couldn't even go down to the 19 levels of hell, let alone reincarnate and seek revenge. A moment later, 2 wisps of soul fire fell into Emolien's hands. Little Tai Sui and the others couldn't help but shudder internally upon hearing this. This savage fellow had actually refined the souls of 2 soul masters. Was he planning to become a puppet? Compared to when he had refined Lu Yiji's soul back then, Prince Emo was obviously much more adept this time. After coming up from the dungeon, Emolien found his little wife by a secluded cliff in the Qingtian Valley. At this time, it was already the beginning of the 12th month, and winter was about to arrive. The grass and trees were withered, and as far as the eye could see, everything had a withered appearance. His Jojo was standing in the midst of the withered leaves, with his back to him. He stood on the edge of the cliff, his white clothes fluttering in the wind. No one knew what he was thinking, but he raised his left hand slightly, his gaze fixed on his palm. Emolien walked over with light steps. When he was several steps away from her, he silently stopped. Naturally, Xiaomu had already heard the footsteps he purposefully let out. She retracted her gaze and looked up at the withered scene in the distance. Her voice was soft as she said, "Do you know, I've been working hard to not let myself become a person I loathe? I don't want to become a devil and become as shameless as them. But just now, I used Fan Gu's daughter to threaten her. I had Fan Gu cut open her own nephew's stomach and stain her hands with blood." Chapter 2060. Emolien quietly stood behind her. His heart clenched tightly as he listened to her almost desolate voice. It was as if, at this very moment, her small hand was tightly gripping his heart, clutching it so tightly that his entire heart started to ache fiercely. Sometimes I look at myself in the mirror. I feel very unfamiliar, very lost. I don't want to be a person that I despise, but many times, I simply can't control my own emotions. I only want to be unbridled and willful just this once. I don't want to be a human. I want to become a demon. I looked at my hand just now. It's white and clean without any blemishes. But I know it's not clean at all. It's so dirty, there's no way to go back. When Arbor turned around, she saw Emolien's figure flashing and suddenly landing in front of her. Stretching out his arm, he hugged her tightly into his embrace. Smelling his scent, Xiaomu quietly leaned into his embrace. For a moment, she only felt her eyes sting, and she had the urge to willfully burst into tears. She wanted to wantonly act coquettishly and roll around in this person's warm embrace. She knew that no matter how overboard she was, he would always stand by her side and support her unconditionally. However, she didn't want him to bear the sin that originally belonged to her. That way, Jojo's heart would ache, he would be sad, he would loathe her and despise her. Emolien's hand gently caressed the back of her head as he hugged her tightly in his embrace. He looked down at her and murmured softly, "I will only say what I'm going to say today just this once. You must firmly remember it in your heart and engrave it in the depths of your soul. For thousands of years, you must not forget it." His slender fingers gently brushed the black hair on her temples as he gazed deeply into her eyes with gentleness. "I don't care if you're a human or a demon. 9 heavens, 9 underworlds, blue skies and clouds, blue skies and yellow springs, I'll follow you. You and I will hold hands for all eternity." Arbor stared at him blankly. Inexplicably, she couldn't stop her tears as they kept falling from her big eyes. She was crying. Emolien's heart clenched tightly. If Fan Gu and Fan Xiuhe were still alive, he would like to cut them into pieces a few more times before making a decision. "Did you hear that, my Jojo?" Emolien raised her hand to wipe away her tears. She pretended to be calm and gave her a faint smile. In fact, her heart was in a mess and she couldn't relax. He stretched out his arms and pulled her into his wide embrace. "Jojo, you have me. Don't think too much. Just do it. Do what you think is right. No matter what the outcome is, I will help you deal with it. If you want to be willful, then be willful. Do whatever you want to do. My Jojo deserves all the best treatment." He reached out and held her small hand, completely enveloping it in his palm. He murmured softly, "How can such a clean hand be dirty? It's not dirty at all. In this world, my Jojo is the most beautiful." He lifted her up and gently covered her lips. "Don't you think so?" Arbor's heart was so close to him that she could only feel her little heart beating loudly, as if it was going to jump out of her chest. Arbor pursed her lips and nodded repeatedly. 9 heavens, 9 underworlds, blue skies and clouds, blue skies and yellow springs, I'll follow you too. Chapter 2061. Emolien, to be able to meet you in this lifetime. It's probably the luckiest thing that happened to me in this lifetime. At that time, I was probably still struggling bitterly in a painful hell. I have you. I have you. I have you. Miss Chiao moved her small head and snuggled into his embrace, squirming back and forth. It was as if she could see herself lying in a dark dungeon during those difficult years, staring at the dark ceiling in a deep daze and helplessness. It was as if she could hear Fangu's shrill voice laughing harshly in her ear. "Kiara, I'm going back to Willow Lane tomorrow. I've been looking at a few families for your cousin recently. Hee hee, there seems to be one that's not bad." Fan Xiuha's hearty laughter rang out. "Then congratulations, Auntie. You should be able to hold your grandson next year. Get married?" At that time, she could only stare blankly at the dark ceiling of the dungeon, listening to the squeaking of the rats. She asked herself again and again in the depths of her heart, what is it like to get married? What is the experience of life? I'm so envious of those people whose limbs are intact, and who can walk normally under the sun, that I'm so envious of Fangu's daughter. So envious. So envious. Emolien raised a hand to stroke her small head. Her gaze passed over Jojo's black hair, and landed on Tong, who was standing in the distance. A cold and stern gaze was released with icy determination. Once the order was given, the latter immediately knelt on one knee, and swiftly left with his men to carry out the order. When cutting weeds you must dig up the roots. Fangu's daughter kill. When it came to the degree of hardening one's heart, His Highness the Crown Prince was clearly many times stronger than Jojo. This man who controlled the lives and deaths of many people on Seacombe Planet didn't have much gentleness and kindness. No matter how harmonious he looked on the outside, his heart was extremely cold. For the sake of MOU's future, for the sake of MO Kingdom's stability and well-being, he could even ruthlessly cut off his 8-year-old nephew, Mo Chung. If it wasn't for Jojo's sake, if it wasn't for Shu Quan's intelligence, Mo Chung would already be a dead man now. He was different from Jojo. If one were to break Jojo's cold outer shell, there would be a soft-hearted little fellow nestled in her snail shell, desperately unwilling to come out. He was a man who was as ruthless as a knife through and through, not to mention killing an insignificant Fangu's daughter. For his Jojo, he would kill 100, kill 1,000, and turn into a demon. So what? Arbor looked up at Emolien and wrinkled his nose. I'm hungry. A faint smile immediately appeared on Emolien's lips. She reached out and carried the little fellow horizontally. What do you want to eat? I'll cook it for you. How about snake meat? Hiss. Snakebao was furious. The little white snake raised its small head and rubbed its little master's wrist. Master Silver, Master Silver. Dragon meat is delicious. Dragon meat is delicious. Arbor reached out and flicked the little white snake's head. He looked back at Emolien, his large, watery eyes sparkling brightly. Emolien lowered her head and kissed his smooth forehead. Then why don't we find an inn to stay at first? I'll cook a sumptuous meal for you. Okay. Arbor nodded. With a wave of his sleeve, dozens of explosive birds flew out from Paradise Planet. These little fellows who played suicide all day only had 3 years of lifespan, and they were preparing for suicide every day. Go. Arbor flicked his finger, and the flock of explosive birds scattered around Qingtian Valley on Mount Wuwang. Chapter 2062. Boom! Boom boom. A few explosions rang out. Wherever the explosive birds passed, the serene and beautiful clear sky valley was blasted into ruins. Arbor swept an indifferent glance over, her eyes without the slightest ripple of emotion. This kind of place that hides filth and tolerates filth. So be it. No matter how beautiful its scenery looked, it couldn't hide its rotten nature. The entire clear sky gate was engulfed in flames. The light of the fire contrasted with Arbor's calm face. She looked at the building that was crackling in the flames, with a trace of coldness in her eyes. The past passed like a dream, and yesterday's events were like yesterday's death. From now on, there was no longer that smiling big brother in the world. She hoped that he could live comfortably and happily in that bloody hell. Have a safe journey. Arbor tugged at the corners of her mouth, trying hard to reveal a smile. Under the light of the fire, it looked extremely magnificent. Emmolien's palm covered her small face. My Jojo, I hope that from now on, you will no longer have any inner demons or nightmares. You will be healthy, happy and smooth. On Shuntian Prefecture's Ping'an Street, many shops had closed down due to poor management, due to the changes in the world. However, many small stalls had popped up on the streets and alleys, selling all kinds of strange little things. This street could be said to be the busiest in the entire Shuntian Prefecture. Immortal Grass Tea House. Hey, did you guys hear? Yesterday, a valley in Mount Wuwang, 50 kilometers outside the city, strangely caught fire. Everyone said that someone had angered a fire-breathing divine beast on Mount Wuwang. The divine beast showed its might. Yes. I heard that the prefecture lord issued a mission and sent several teams to Mount Wuwang to investigate. TSK, this matter is going to blow up. Hey, do you guys think it could be a fire-breathing divine beast? Who knows? Whether or not a divine beast is a divine beast has little to do with us ordinary people. That's true. I heard that something big happened in Willow Alley yesterday. Yes. It seems that there was a female corpse hanging at the entrance of Willow Alley. It almost scared the night watchmen out of their wits. Did you find out who killed him? Sai, you're really naive. What kind of world is this? Who knows if a corpse puppet will jump out and bite you to death when you walk down the street? That's right. In the past, when there was peace and prosperity, even if 1 or 2 civilians died, they wouldn't necessarily investigate. I heard that the 4th steward of the manor head's manor head gave the order to burn that woman to prevent her corpse from mutating. Poor thing, he's still young. It's said that his family is quite wealthy. I wonder if it's a robbery. Robbery? One of them snorted and said, You guys are really naive. It's said that the female corpse's mouth was covered with mud, and there were 3 soul-subduing talismans on her body. Even if she went to the underworld, she wouldn't be able to ask for help. How heartless. Killing someone is just a matter of time. GGG. Cha-cha. The bell at the door rang, and everyone subconsciously turned their heads to look. With this glance, his eyes almost blurred. The 2 women who entered the door were as beautiful as peaches and plums, and as brilliant as flowing flowers. Their ornaments jingled, revealing half of their fair and delicate arms. Their soft breasts rose and fell, and their slender waists were half exposed. The onlookers' eyeballs almost fell out of their sockets. The sound of saliva being sucked in could be heard incessantly. The gazes of all the men in the hall fell on the 2 of them. Chapter 2063. Aya. This is the capital of Shuntian Prefecture, but I haven't seen any spacious and bright taverns along the way. I'm so tired. Fairy Ginkgo flicked the pink silk handkerchief in her hand and waved it in the air. I'm not going. Have a cup of tea before you go. The men and women who followed them and were all like immortals in a painting, making people unable to take their eyes off them. The man in red brushed his sleeves, moving gracefully. The man in black had picturesque features, gentle as the wind. The little girl held by the man in black had an expressionless face, cold as ice. Her eyes were like the stars in the dark night, dreamy and illusory, as if she could suck in a person's soul with just a glance. This group of people walked in slowly, immediately illuminating the entire humble room. Everyone felt that the small shabby tea house in front of them had improved a lot in an instant. The waiter hurriedly ran over, wiped the chairs and stools, and invited them to sit down with a smile. Arbor sat by the window, one hand supporting her chin, her gaze drifting to the bustling street. Lian, do you think that child will have a good life in the future? Of course. Although that farmer isn't particularly rich, the couple are hard-working people, praised as good people by the surrounding villages. Lian raised his hand and patted her head. Don't worry, that child will get better. Arbor turned her little head, looked at him and nodded. There were no survivors in the dungeon of Clear Sky Valley, but the child they had saved in the underground base had stubbornly survived. After a period of recuperation, her body had improved a lot. When she was sent to the farmer, the child was already able to speak. As long as she took the pills she left behind on time, she would be able to jump around in less than half a year. She hoped that the child would have a normal family and walk a normal life path, and that there would be no more disasters or mishaps in the future. Good girl. I'll send people to check on that child from time to time. There will be no problem. Okay. Arbor nodded, taking the tea he handed over. Dang dang. The bell at the door rang again. Arbor looked up and saw an old acquaintance, the little yellow crane, and her unruly senior sister, Fairy Lingfei, walking in. Lingfei's gaze fell on Arbor, and the others with a trace of resentment in his eyes. Immortal Yellow Crane had already strode over and greeted Xiao Mu enthusiastically. Little benefactor, you're also here. Huanghe. Fairy Lingfei yelled at her in exasperation. She turned and walked towards the door. Let's go back to the residence. Yellow Crane Fairy turned her head and glanced at her senior sister. She held Arbor's hand and said, Little benefactor, where do you plan to stay? I have to return to the residence to see Master. Tell me where you're staying, and I'll come and play with you tomorrow. Huanghe. Fairy Lingfei roared, causing Fairy Huanghe's hand, which was holding Arbor, to tremble slightly. Heavens, senior sister Lingfei's temper has been too bad recently for it to suddenly flare up. Could it be that his body had mutated? Why aren't you leaving? Fairy Lingfei swept a cold glance at Yellow Crane Fairy, and her gaze swept disdainfully over Arbor. Today, the residence is hosting a banquet to entertain the young masters from the Divine Continent. Master wants us to return as soon as possible. Are you going to defy Master's orders? Sob sob sob. Yellow Crane Fairy bit her handkerchief and reluctantly let go of Arbor's hand. Little benefactor, then tomorrow at this time. Can you wait for me here? Fairy Yellow Crane, can you not act cute? Chapter 2064. Arbor imperceptibly pulled over He Shurchen's sleeve and wiped her little paws. Exasperated, He Shurchen tugged back. Thank you, this isn't a rag. Benefactor, if I can't repay your kindness, I won't be at ease for the rest of my life. Fairy Huanghe bit her handkerchief, tears about to fall out. Huanghe. Fairy Lingfei was probably about to explode from this brainless stoic fangirl. She took a few steps forward and kicked Fairy Huanghe's butt. Bam. Clang. The soup, it's all spilled. Let's go. This idiot was simply disgracing the palace of Cold Blood and Shuntian Prefecture. Fairy Lingfei grabbed Huanghe's arm and strode outside. Don't think you can approach our palace of Cold Blood just because you've hooked up with Huanghe. Are you deluding yourself into thinking you can achieve meteoric success in a single step? Give up on that idea. Fairy Lingfei turned around and shouted at Arbor as she walked out the door. The little stoic looked at her in bewilderment. Why did she feel like this senior sister of Huang? He seemed to have contracted a deranged disease. Do you want me to take your pulse? The little stoic extended a small hand, but before she could finish speaking, Fairy Lingfei rolled her eyes at her. Deranged disease can be treated in the early stages. You only need to recuperate for half a month before you fully recover. In the later stages, you only need to pay more attention to controlling your emotions, paying attention to your dietary restrictions, and engaging in sexual intercourse less. HM. The little fellow looked in bewilderment at Prince Mo, who had suddenly reached out to cover her mouth. She turned around and saw that everyone in the hall seemed to have very odd expressions. The venerable Peach Blossom Immortal even covered his forehead with his hand, exasperated. What did she say? Why did Fairy Ling Fei's face and ears turn red and her nose puffed? She clearly looked like she was about to explode from anger, that she was merely explaining medical theory, and reminding Ling Fei that treatment should be done sooner rather than later. It couldn't be delayed. Was there a problem? Shouldn't an illness be treated as soon as possible? What if the illness spread in the later stages, and there was nothing they could do? PFT. Ha 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 ha. Fairy Ginkgo couldn't hold it in any longer. She collapsed on the table, and pounded her fist on the table, indicating that she really couldn't hold it in any longer. He felt like this Fairy Ling Fei and the little stoic were talking in two completely different worlds. What a joke. Can you not be so funny? Fairy Ginkgo wiped the tears from her eyes as she laughed. She felt as if she had laughed so hard that her abs were showing. What's so funny? Do you think you're not sick? The stoic-faced man pointed at the middle-aged man who was grinning from ear to ear at the table next to him. I see that your eye sockets are sunken, and your complexion is dark and gloomy. That's because you lack essence, and are unable to maintain a healthy complexion. Overdoing it every day will deplete the essence of your kidney. If this goes on, in less than half a year, you will not have enough young blood, and will die of kidney deficiency. Mo Lien, Yuan Shurchen, Little Taisui, and the others all grimaced. Ginkgo Fairy pounded the table and laughed wildly. In the quiet lobby, it seemed particularly bold and unrestrained. The tea house, which had been silent for a moment, suddenly burst into laughter. The middle-aged man's donkey face fell. He stood up and pointed at Arbor in exasperation. You little girl. What are you saying? Don't you know shame? Doctors don't differentiate between men and women when it comes to judging people. How can I not know shame? Arbor impatiently swept a glance over the people in the lobby, who were laughing uncontrollably. Was there something wrong with these people? What kind of joke did she say? She was properly pointing out someone's illness, yet she was ridiculed by the crowd. Chapter 2065. You have pimples on both sides of your cheeks that sometimes itch. Your complexion is sallow, and you vomit every 3 days. It's indeed a stomach ailment. You still have time to laugh at others, but your own body also has stagnant vital energy and blood stasis. You won't last 3 years. And you. The little stoic swept a glance at the young man who was grinning from ear to ear. You're young, but your waist is stooped, and it's hard to stand upright. Your sweat pores open and close abnormally, and cold evil invades your body. You clearly have an abscess. Fancy that you can still laugh. If the cold air penetrates your blood vessels, it will evolve into a fistula. And you're even more ridiculous. Your face is green and your eyes are red. When you laugh, your throat growls. You've lost vital energy in your stomach. This is a sign of death. Absolute silence ensued after her tirade. Everyone stared dumbfoundedly at this young little stoic, who mercilessly reprimanded others the moment she opened her mouth. Most importantly, she didn't even bother to lift her eyelids after saying so much. Her gaze swept past them with a snort of contempt, as if she was sweeping a group of ants, and didn't linger for a moment. The venerable Peach Blossom Immortal clenched his fist, and couldn't resist bursting into laughter. No way, he couldn't take it anymore. His JoJo was seriously too adorable. Even when she kept a straight face and reprimanded others, she was much more adorable than others. How preposterous! The middle-aged man with the long donkey face was the first to jump up. With a huff, he flung his sleeves and strode out of the tea house. Soon after, a string of people also stood up with him, their faces ashen from anger, and they all left the tea house with quick strides. He only came to drink tea. Yet everyone in the tea house knew that he had a kidney deficiency, a stomach ailment, and an irregular lung meridian. Where would these wealthy business owners put their faces? The tea house owner kept pleading like a grandpa. Don't go. Hey, everyone, don't go. Boss Zhang. Everyone threw down their money and left in a huff. At this time, an idiot suddenly clapped vigorously with a fangirl-like adoration on her face. Her grape-like eyes stared intently at JoJo and said, "Little benefactor, you're so awesome. You know so much." "Get lost," Fairy Ling Fei roared angrily. She grabbed Jojo's diehard fan, Fairy Yellow Crane, and dragged her outside. Little benefactor. I'll come and find you tomorrow. Wait for me. Hey, senior sister, don't pull me. Senior sister. Insanity, if not treated properly, will worsen in the future. It will lead to emotional rage, mental disorder, and even severely affect the couple's daily life, resulting in the inability to give birth. Before Miss Chiao could finish her words, Prince Mo, who couldn't bear to listen any longer, pulled her into his arms and covered her mouth forcefully. Fairy Lingfei was so angry that her entire body trembled violently. She abruptly turned her head and bellowed at the little stoic sitting inside the tea house. I'm not sick. Arbor pulled Emolien's hand away and looked at the man in confusion. Why are you gagging me? People like you who refuse treatment are the most fearful. If you don't treat a minor illness, you'll be unlucky if you get a major one. You're always so stubborn. Hu Shichen's shoulders trembled as he lowered his head. He laughed so hard that his stomach hurt. Emolien didn't know whether to laugh or cry. A stubborn duck, isn't that your style, darling? Humph. Miss Chiao retracted her small hand and picked up the teacup to gulp down a large mouthful of tea. It was so tiring. If it weren't for the fact that those people were truly outrageous, how could she have been happy and said so much to analyze their illnesses? However, this bunch of idiots all thought she was a barefoot doctor on the streets and spoke without thinking. Chapter 2066. You have no taste. I can't be bothered with you. It was simply a waste of her saliva. Arbor drank another mouthful of tea. Just as the group was about to leave, they suddenly saw a middle-aged scholarly man walk into the tea house's entrance. As soon as he entered, he cupped his hands at everyone and said with a smile, Are you the top-notch academy teachers and students who won third place in the academy ranking competition? Prefecture Lord invites you. Please honor us with your presence. Emolien and company looked at this middle-aged man with a spurious smile. Uncle Da, why are you inviting them? Fairy Lingfei was so angry that she wanted to vomit blood, but she had no choice but to walk back into the tea house when she heard his voice. Ever since she met the little stoics group, she, Fairy Lingfei, had been making a fool of herself. Her various humiliations made her feel indignant. Yet now, Master and Prefecture Lord were actually inviting this bunch of bumpkins to Shentian Prefecture's main estate for a banquet? On what basis? Fairy Lingfei's entire face hung upside down in anger, and she coldly glared at Arbor and company. That stoic face was certainly hateful, but those men beside the little stoic were probably all blind. Such a beautiful woman like her actually couldn't enter their eyes at first glance? Was Gung Pingqing impatient? As soon as they stepped into Shentian Prefecture's prefectural city, Gung Pingqing impatiently wanted to invite them over? When Arbor thought about how she had secretly crossed swords with Shentian Prefecture's prefecture lord many times, she couldn't help but feel vexed. She was well aware of Shentian Prefecture's intentions. Jojo, if you don't want to go, then don't deal with them, Emolien said softly as she grasped the little fellow's small hand. Could it be that a mere Shentian Prefecture's prefecture lord could overturn the heavens? Arbor shook her head. Let's go take a look. When she thought of the various good deeds Shentian Prefecture's prefecture lord had done, Arbor couldn't help but sneer. Previously, Prince Mo told her that they didn't find anything substantial or useful during the process of searching Fan Gu and Fan Xiuhe's souls. Someone must have tampered with them. However, it didn't matter if they couldn't find anything. This was because Arbor was very clear that this matter was definitely related to the Shentian Mansion's mansion master, Gung Pingqing. Seeing that Arbor had agreed, the middle-aged scholar, who came to invite them, seemed to be relieved. He smiled and cupped his hands. That's good. Everyone please. Today, several young heroes from the Divine Land were invited to the main mansion. All of you are of similar age, why don't we make friends? From the middle-aged scholar's point of view, being able to make friends with the young masters and young ladies of the Divine Land was naturally something that everyone envied. Unfortunately, Arbor's expression was cold. He glanced at him, got up, and walked out of the door with Emolien, hand in hand. Such a shabby carriage, is it here to pick us up? Arbor said in disdain. He glanced coldly at the middle-aged scholar and said, "Since your mansion's mansion master isn't sincerely inviting you, then please leave." "Ah, wait." He saw that the little stoic was about to turn around and leave while holding onto the man's arm. The middle-aged scholar couldn't help but feel anxious. This little fellow didn't follow the rules at all. She had previously agreed to follow him to the city lord's estate. So why did her attitude completely change in such a short time, after they walked from inside to outside? "The city lord is sincerely inviting you. What was wrong with this carriage? How is it neglecting them?" The middle-aged scholar simply wanted to howl in his heart. Women's minds were truly fickle. Arbor's eyes didn't have the slightest warmth. He swept the middle-aged scholar a glance and snorted. "Break." Chapter 2067. This kind of lousy carriage was so bumpy that it might even make you throw up last night's dinner. Even the carriage she had left Kwoto village and back then couldn't compare. Fairy Lingfei stood behind Uncle Da and said resentfully, "We're only going to Shuntian Prefecture's main residence for less than a quarter of an hour, but you're making so many rude requests." Xiao Mu harumphed and turned her small head away, no longer paying attention to Fairy Lingfei. Emolien held Arbor's hand. Just as they were about to leave, they heard the middle-aged scholar call out anxiously, "Wait, everyone, please wait. I'll have someone prepare a new horse and carriage. Miss, you'll definitely be satisfied." This scholar was truly helpless. These people were clearly centered around this stoic young miss. If this young miss left, not a single one of them would be left behind. Emolien's cold gaze swept over the middle-aged scholar's face, and she sneered, "Gung Pengqing is so considerate." Arbor knew very well what Gung Pengqing was up to, and Emolien even more so. However, the two of them weren't afraid of getting into trouble. If Gung Pengqing wanted to cause trouble, then he would have to weigh his own worth and see if he had the qualifications to cause trouble. Soon, a low-key and luxurious carriage with dark gold ripples appeared before everyone's eyes. There was more than enough space to accommodate 20 to 30 people. Thus, everyone filed in and sat in the same carriage. Upon seeing this, the little yellow crane also hurriedly squeezed in. It had originally wanted to squeeze in next to Qiao Qiao, but after being glared at by Crown Prince Mo's icy gaze, it immediately shrunk to the side listlessly, not daring to fight over the spot next to Qiao Qiao with that great sir. Fairy Lingfei, who was used to Fairy Yellow Crane's brainless fangirl, wasn't so angry now. However, she was just about to get into the carriage with a stifled feeling in her chest when Dao Wuji, who was sitting at the door, blocked her. "Hey, the carriage is full. Don't come in again." Fairy Lingfei was instantly enraged. Seeing that they were about to quarrel again, the middle-aged scholar hurriedly turned around and brought over a vigorous horse for Fairy Lingfei. Fairy Lingfei angrily leaped onto her horse and swung her whip. Everyone could only see the horse galloping away, kicking up large clouds of dust as if venting her anger. Sure enough, from the tea house to the Shuntian Prefecture's main residence, it took about 7 to 8 minutes. Everyone got off the carriage one by one and followed Uncle Da, who was respectfully leading the way in front, into the main mansion. They passed through the corridor and walked towards the main hall. Layers upon layers of houses were hidden between the mountains, rivers, and pavilions. Shuntian Prefecture's prefecture lord was holding a banquet for guests. Accompanying him was his wife, the current palace lord of the Palace of Heartless, Madame Feng. Pa. Arbor's group didn't expect such a wonderful show to be waiting for them. As soon as they arrived in front of the reception hall, there was a row of 7 or 8 people tied up in front of the door. All of them were badly mutilated. It was hard for those young masters and ladies who were laughing and joking in the hall to still be able to eat. The Shuntian Prefecture's prefecture lord was too impatient to give them a show of strength. Prince Mo's lower lip curled slightly. Holding his little wife's hand, he led everyone into the main hall slowly. Arbor turned his head to take a look and suddenly stopped in his tracks. A trace of anger flashed across his face, and without any explanation, he slapped a burly man with his palm. This person was currently using his whip on a thin and weak servant. The whip was swung with all his might and vigor. "It's the last day of the month. I'm here to rob a monthly ticket. Don't forget to vote when you pass by. Vote, vote, vote. Chapter 2068. Suddenly, the wind from someone's palm swept across his back, and the burly man couldn't help but stumble forward. He didn't have eyes and bumped into another person's whip. Immediately, his flesh was lacerated, and he howled miserably as he covered the whip marks on his face. For a moment, there was silence both inside and outside the hall. Because of this sudden scene, everyone stopped their random banter and looked over in surprise. Sitting in the main hall, the Shuntian Prefecture's prefecture lord and his wife respectfully accompanied them. They looked at Arbor's group with different expressions. The Shuntian Prefecture's prefecture lord, Gung Pengcheng, looked like a middle-aged man close to 50 years old. His temples were slightly bald, and he had thick eyebrows and big eyes. When he looked at Arbor, that kind of scrutinizing gaze was full of deterrence. Sitting beside him was the palace lord of the Palace of Cold Blood, Madame Feng. There were fishtail marks at the corners of her eyes, and there were several fine wrinkles on her neck. Although her makeup was very delicate, it couldn't completely cover the traces of age on her face. Instead, her pair of dark eyes appeared very delicate and bright. Arbor looked expressionlessly at the burly man who fell to the ground and covered his face as he cried out in pain. His fingers moved slightly, and a green vine drilled out from his wrist. With a swoosh, it cut the wooden stake in front of him. The vine swung, and a skinny figure was caught in the air. In the next instant, he pulled the dark and skinny 11-year-old boy to his side. Not only did this child have several whip marks on his face, but his body was also full of wounds. His legs were also twisted in an abnormal way, as if they had been broken while he was still alive. Xiaomu's cold and severe gaze abruptly landed on the burly man who hit her. Scum! Countless vines drilled out from the bottom of the burly man's feet, and like thousands of poisonous snakes, they drilled into the man's body. Caught off guard, the burly man took a full blow from a level 4 spiritual master. How could he withstand it? He cried out involuntarily on the spot. Shuntian Prefecture's prefecture lord, Gung Pengcheng, stood up and stretched out his hand. You must be a student from a top academy. If you have anything to say, please speak properly. Who am I? Don't you know? Man or head? Why are you still pretending? Arbor coldly interrupted Gung Pengcheng's hypocritical words. There was not the slightest fluctuation of emotion on his stoic face. The little girl's eyes were filled with disdain and mockery, making people feel uncomfortable. However, Gung Pengcheng forced himself to endure it, and said with a fake chuckle, Miss seems to have some misunderstanding about this man or head. Crack! The burly man who was originally hanging on the brambles suddenly fell from above and landed heavily on the ground, interrupting Gung Pengcheng's words. The hall was dead silent. Manor Lord Gung's eyelids twitched, and he felt a little angry. This little girl was too bold. As expected, it was completely consistent with the news that his subordinate had sent him a few days ago. What an arrogant, despotic, and spoiled brat. Originally, he wanted to give them a small show of strength, but who would have thought that before he could do so, his subordinate would be killed on the spot? Damn it! Gung Pengcheng's face instantly darkened, and he looked at Arbor with a slightly angry expression. What are you doing? Arbor was too lazy to pay attention to him. She placed the thin, dark-skinned child on the ground and reached out to treat the injury on his broken leg. At this moment, a well-dressed young man walked down from above Gung Pengcheng. His appearance was delicate and handsome, but his chin was very sharp and thin, and his skin was too white. He seemed to be sick all year round. Chapter 2069. He was dressed in a long white robe that appeared somewhat transparent under the sunlight. One could vaguely see a lake blue high-collared inner robe inside, and a few lotus flowers were embroidered on the side of his neck with golden thread. Although his clothes were very luxurious, this young master's eyes looked very listless, as if he would faint in the next second. Emolian raised her eyebrows. Although this was the first time she saw this person, his appearance matched with a person in the book of relatives and friends in the divine land in her mind. Prince Jianping's heir Emokuan. Prince Jianping was Imperial Father's youngest brother and lived in the Divine Land's capital all year round. Speaking of which, this Crown Prince of Jianping was his younger cousin. For some reason, he actually came to Shentian Prefecture personally. However, his luxurious accessories could not hide his sickly face that was full of indulgence. The vassal Prince of Jianping, Emokuan, walked down the steps step by step. When he arrived in front of Qiao Mu and Emo Lian, he sized Qiao Mu up from head to toe. Your looks are not bad, but it's a pity that your temperament is unflattering. Forget it. This young master will be merciful and take you in. I'll bring you back and let someone educate you well. Emo Lian! Exclamation point. Hu Shirchen. Little Tai Sui, Dao Wuji, and the others all looked at Prince Jianping's heir, as if they were looking at an idiot. Was this person tired of living? Couldn't he live properly? Why did he have to provoke Prince Mo? Shentian Prefecture's prefecture lord hurriedly stood up and smiled obsequiously, introducing him to Arbor and Emo Lian. This is the nephew of the Divine Land's emperor, Prince Jianping's heir, Emokuan. Little Tai Sui. Hu Shirchen. They both looked at Prince Jianping's heir sympathetically. At such a young age, his life was about to come to an end. What a pitiful and sad thing this was. Unfortunately, they could not help even if they wanted to. They could only sit and watch the show and eat melons to relieve their boredom. Arbor finished treating the boy's leg injury and gave him a pill before patting his head and saying, "It's fine now." "Thank you, miss." At this moment, Meng Mai also recognized who the young lady in front of her was. She was the girl who had led him to look for the land whale at the small market at the entrance of Shentian Prefecture that day. Little Meng Mai bowed his head gratefully at Arbor, repeatedly thanking her for saving his life. If it wasn't for this honorable young lady saving him once again, he probably wouldn't have been able to endure that vicious beating just now. Emokuan stood in front of them. His face had changed from its initial complacency to an extremely ugly expression. "Brat, didn't you hear what I said?" The Crown Prince of Jianping, Emokuan, glared angrily at Arbor and threatened. "Do you know who I am? How dare you neglect me like this?" Emokuan, Crown Prince of Jianping, was furious. Slap! Suddenly, a bone-chilling hand grabbed Emokuan's neck. Emo Lian stared at him coldly for a long while before she laughed coldly. "You're the Crown Prince of Jianping, Emokuan, right?" Little Tai Sui, Hu Jinshan, and the others were all secretly getting excited. Coming. Prince Emo was going to teach this brat an unforgettable lesson. What do you want to do? How could the Crown Prince of Jianping dare to say any more nonsense when he suddenly realized that his neck had fallen into someone else's hands? His face flushed red as he shouted anxiously and angrily, "Let go, let go!" He was the nephew of the Divine Prefecture's emperor, the son of the Crown Prince of Jianping. How could he be in such a sorry state and have his neck pinched by a nobody? Chapter 2070. Emo Lian's gaze was extremely cold. There was no warmth in her eyes as she looked at the heir of the Duke of Jianping, whom she was holding by the neck like a little chick. "You, what do you want?" The heir of the Duke of Jianping, Emokuan, was not a fool. After all, he had been in power for so many years, so he could still discern some dangers. For example, this man before him had a huge impact on his soul, causing him to feel a trace of inexplicable fear. Why didn't he know? It was as if this man was not someone he, Emokuan, could provoke. But was that possible? He came from the capital of Shenzhou. How could a mere cultivator from the 6 prefectures possibly? Emokuan's gaze changed several times, each time uglier than the last. At this moment, he had already experienced what it meant to be a fish on the chopping block. If his slender neck fell into the hands of an unrelated person, it would indeed be quite depressing. Moreover, this person's strength seemed to be increasing continuously. In his hands, he was like a fish that had been peeled out of the water. His limbs twitched uncontrollably, and his face was paler than before. No, don't kill me. Emokuan finally panicked. He simply could not understand why this was happening. He could not even last half a move in the hands of a mere cultivator from the middle 6 prefectures. And his neck was already being held? This did not seem real no matter how one looked at it. Arbor was completely focused on treating little Fierce Mike earlier, so she did not hear Emo-kun's teasing at all. Seeing how Emo-lien treated the young man before her, she could not help but feel slightly moved. She whispered to Shi-chun, "Is that heir of the Duke of Jianping, Emo-kun, Lian's relative?" Shi-chun nodded. "It's obvious. This Emo-kun is her younger cousin." He was so ruthless to his younger cousin. Arbor looked at Emo-kun sympathetically and pursed her lips. He must have angered my Lien. He really brought this upon himself. At this moment, Manor Head Gung and the palace master of the Palace of Cold Blood, Madame Feng, could not help but cry out, "Little brother, please stop. Stop, quickly stop." Gung Pingqing practically jumped up and stamped his feet as he shouted, "Don't mess around. This young master in front of you is not a young man that ordinary people can casually touch. He's..." Boom. Before Gung Pingqing could finish his sentence, he saw the poor guy in Emo-lien's hand get kicked down the stairs by Emo-lien like a flying quail. Emo-kun took a few steps toward the stairs. Before he could even slow down, his entire body fell flat on the ground and fiercely bit the ground. Fortunately, the two big teeth in front of the door were saved. Otherwise, his current appearance would be even worse. He would be so ugly that he couldn't even look at it. Shocked, Manor Lord Gung hastily stood up and signaled the maidservants around him to swarm forward and help Emo-kun up. "Your Highness! Your Highness!" Everyone scrambled to help the Crown Prince of Jianping up from the ground. They didn't dare to raise their heads, let alone look at his slightly distorted face. "You all of you!" Prince Jianping was so angry that a lump of blood formed in his chest. He opened his mouth and was about to rush out. With great difficulty, the Crown Prince finally managed to stop his throat from choking. He rubbed his chest with all his might, and only then did he feel slightly better. Your Highness, go away!" the Crown Prince of Jianping roared. He forcefully pushed aside the two maidservants beside him and strode toward Emo-lien. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.